Lower your sword, set it down by the fire, pull your furs up, and let the cold stay outside where it belongs. Tonight we are going to walk through the quieter corners of Skyrim, the places the roads don't reach, the stories that most travelers never stop long enough to hear. These aren't the tales of Alduin or the Civil War. These are the ones told in low voices at the hearth, the ones that linger after the fire goes out. So, settle in. Let the wind go by outside. We have a long road ahead, and every step of it is worth taking slowly. Part 1. The Pale Lady of Frostmere Crypt. There is a stretch of road that winds south of Dawnstar, cutting through the pale expanse of the hold that carries the same name. The Pale is aptly named. It is a wash of gray sky and gray earth, and the kind of cold that doesn't announce itself but simply settles in your bones while you're walking, until you realize you've stopped feeling your fingers and can't quite remember when that happened. Most travelers move through it quickly. They have business in Whiterun or Windhelm, and the Pale is just the distance between those two warmer places. But if you slow down on that road, if you let yourself get drawn off the packed dirt and into the rougher terrain to the south, you'll eventually find yourself within sight of a place called Frostmere Crypt. It doesn't look like much from the outside. A low stone arch set into a hillside, ancient Nordic construction from the kind of era so distant that even scholars struggle to put a name to it. The stones are frost-streaked and dark, and the entrance breathes a faint cold air even on warmer days, as if the inside of the place is colder than the world around it, somehow, as if something in there is keeping the temperature down on purpose. The first sign that something has gone wrong here will reach you before you even enter. You'll find them by the road or near it. A woman, if you're lucky enough to catch her in the moment before everything unravels. Her name is Isa Blackthorn, and she is a bandit, which in Skyrim means she is one of the thousands of people who ended up outside of walls and cities and wound up carrying a weapon for a living. She's running when you find her, or she's been cornered, or she's already been killed by her former companions. One of the bandits who was her friend days ago is trying to end her now, because something happened inside that crypt, and alliances don't survive whatever it was. If you reach her in time and she survives, she won't stop to have a long conversation. She'll tell you a few things quickly, the way a person talks when they want to put distance between themselves and a place as fast as possible. She was part of the crew. There was a sword. Someone took it who shouldn't have, and now people are dead, and she's leaving, and she isn't coming back, and you should do the same. The someone who took the sword was her friend. His name was Roger, and he was a Khajiit, and he apparently lost his mind. That's the whole story as far as Isa is concerned. She's already moving south by the time she finishes telling it. But if you go into the crypt, if you push past the cold air and the low stone doorway and the faint dread that the place radiates, like heat radiates from an ember, you'll find that there's considerably more to it than a stolen sword and a bandit who snapped. The inside of Frostmere Crypt is what you'd expect from a Nordic ruin. Draugr in the alcoves, stone floors worn smooth by centuries of cold and damp, low ceilings that press down on your shoulders and make you walk slightly hunched. The usual mess of bones and faded cloth, and the particular smell of sealed-away places, that combination of ancient dust and stale air, and something faintly mineral underneath. You'll fight your way through the upper levels without finding anything unusual. And then the passage opens and changes. There's a forest down there, a real one, lit by something that isn't torchlight, a faint cold luminescence coming from the ground itself, from pale mushrooms and roots that glow with an eerie blue-white light. Trees grow in the cavern, bare-branched and silver, reaching upward toward a ceiling that is stone and not sky, but that the trees seem to believe is sky anyway. The whole space breathes differently, quieter than the tunnel above, with the specific hush of a place that has been sealed off from the world for long enough to develop its own weather, its own tiny ecosystem, its own rules. This is where Rajir came. This is where the sword called him. You'll find Kier first, the bandit leader. He's on the ground, not dead yet when you arrive, and the things he manages to say between shallow breaths piece together what happened. He found the underground forest first. He brought his crew down here, and they camped, and he told Rajir not to touch the altar, not to touch the sword on the altar, and Rajir agreed and then took the sword anyway in the middle of the night and disappeared into the trees. And since then Kier has heard things in the dark, seen shapes, and his people have been dying. There are journals here, Kier's and Isa's, and reading them fills in the gaps. The bandits stumbled into this place by accident while digging for valuables and found something they weren't equipped to understand. The underground forest isn't natural. Nothing in it is natural. It predates the crypt above it, predates the Nordic burials, predates almost everything. And at the center of it, on a low stone altar that might be the oldest thing in all of Skyrim, there is a sword, the Pale Blade. It's a beautiful thing, pale and cold to the touch, and it has been waiting on that altar for a very long time. Roger took it because something told him to. The something that told him has a name, and you're going to meet her. She is called the Pale Lady, and she is a wisp mother, and she moves through the silver trees like mist moves through a morning field, barely there and then entirely there, right in front of you, with eyes that are the same cold blue-white as the mushrooms and the ghost light filtering up from the ground. She does not speak. She doesn't need to. Her presence communicates something beyond language, a kind of sorrow so old it has gone past grieving into something quieter, something that has settled into the bones of this place the way cold settles into stone. The legend connected to her, pieces of which exist in Nordic texts and folklore books scattered across Skyrim, calls her a figure who wanders the northern marshes forever seeking a lost daughter. Some versions say she steals children who stray from the roads. Others say her sobbing wail, if you hear it, can kill you where you stand. But behind all the versions is a kernel of something older, ancient records that reference a figure called Omriel, someone Isgramor's heirs fought across decades, someone they finally sealed away in an underground forest at the center of Frostmere Crypt. The sword on the altar isn't just a weapon, it's a binding, a seal, a key, and a lock. Roger didn't steal a sword. He removed a lock from a door that was supposed to stay closed, and the Pale Lady has been out in the silver trees ever since, and Roger has been following her through them in a kind of daze, carrying the sword back toward the altar and then being turned around again, walking in circles in that underground grove while she watches him from between the branches. When you find him, he won't be rational. He'll be standing in the cold glow of the mushrooms, with the pale blade in his hands and the look in his eyes of someone who hasn't slept in days and has given up expecting to. He's been down here long enough that the line between waking and dreaming has dissolved. He believes he's returning the sword. He's been trying to return the sword, but every time he gets close to the altar, she's there, and he can't quite complete the movement, and so he walks the circle again. You have a choice here, two of them, and both of them are quiet. You can fight the Pale Lady. She isn't easy to kill, Wisp Mothers being something more than just physical, creatures made partially of something cold and immaterial that shrugs off ordinary damage. But she can be brought down, and when she is, the light in the grove dims slightly, as if something that was holding it in place has let go. Roger, freed from whatever hold she had on him, will slump down and either flee or fall, depending on what the encounter has cost him. Or you can put the sword back yourself. Walk to the altar with the Pale Blade and set it in its place and let the binding reseal. The Pale Lady doesn't fight you if you choose this. She watches, and there is something in her watching that is harder to sit with than her attacking would be. Something that looks like relief and grief tangled together, the expression of someone who has been trying to close a door for centuries and has finally been helped. She fades. The grove goes quiet. The silver trees stand very still. Neither choice gives you much of an explanation. That's the thing about this quest, the thing that makes it stay with you. You walk away from Frostmere Crypt without really understanding what you witnessed. You don't know what the Pale Lady is, not truly. You don't know what she was sealed for or why. You don't know if the thing she was seeking, the daughter the legends mention, is real, or if it's a story that grew up around something else entirely. You don't know if what she felt at the end was peace or just the absence of the particular kind of suffering that comes from being bound to something for too long. You just know the grove is quiet now, and the sword is back where it was. And somewhere south of the Pale, a bandit named Isa is walking very fast in the direction of anywhere else. The crypt breathes its cold air out into the world as you leave. The frost-streaked stones catch the pale northern light. The road is still there, still heading south toward Whiterun. You keep walking. Drop a comment below and tell me what time it is where you're watching, and where in the world you're watching from. And if this kind of storytelling helps you unwind, consider subscribing. There's a lot more road ahead. Part 2, Laid to Rest. The ghost in the graveyard at Morthal is the kind of town that people end up in rather than travel to. It sits in the middle of Yalmarch, which is itself a hold that seems to have been placed on the map by someone who wanted to make a point about isolation. The land around Morthal is mostly marsh, gray-green and fog-wrapped, crossed by wooden walkways that sink slightly with every step and emit low, creaking sounds even when there is no wind. The trees that grow here grow in the style of trees that have given up on reaching upward and instead spread sideways, low and wide, their branches dragging in the brackish water. The town itself is small enough that everyone knows everyone, and everyone knowing everyone means that when something goes wrong, there's nowhere to hide it. The gossip in Morthal has the specific pressure of gossip in enclosed spaces, the kind where a rumor isn't really a rumor by the time it reaches you, because everyone has added something to it, and it has grown into something larger than facts and smaller than the truth. What happened at Hrogar's house is not quite a rumor anymore. It's a thing that happened, a real thing, and the ash and charred timber at the edge of the village are real. And Hrogar's wife and daughter are real in the way that dead people are real, which is to say they are very real in their absence. The house burned, and they were inside it. That much is not in dispute. What's in dispute is everything else. Hrogar is not grieving. That's the part that turns a tragedy into a suspicion. He's been seen with Alva, who moved into Morthal recently, who is beautiful and composed, and who has been spending evenings with Hrogar that seem inappropriate given the timing, given the ash that is still fresh, given the fact that his wife and daughter were burned alive inside a house that he walked out of. The Jarl, a woman named Idgrod Ravencrone, who is known for seeing things other people can't, looks at the situation and sees something darker than convenience. She looks at Hrogar, and she says, quietly, to anyone who asks, that she believes he is not fully himself, that something is wearing him. She's right, as it turns out, but she doesn't have proof. And in Skyrim, a Jarl can't move against a citizen without proof, even if what she's seeing is real. The charred house sits at the edge of town, and children are told not to play near it. The foundation stones are black. The smell of old fire hasn't fully left the air around it, the way fire smell clings to places longer than it should, as if smoke leaves a kind of memory in porous stone. And at night, in the cemetery just up the hill, a small ghost sometimes appears. Her name is Helgi. She was Hrogar's daughter. She is 8 years old, or she was 8 years old. The distinction between tenses being something she herself doesn't seem to have figured out yet. She knows she's in the graveyard. She knows there's another person who plays with her, someone she calls the other one, and she's waiting for you to come and play hide and seek, because playing is what she knows, and playing is what she does when the night comes and there's nothing else. You have to go to her after dark. That's important. Whatever Helgi is, whatever holds the small ghost in the cemetery up the hill from the burned house, she only manifests after the sun goes down. During the day, the graveyard is empty and the mounds are cold, and there's no one there. But when the light fails and the marsh fog starts coming in off the water and Morthal's windows begin to glow with indoor firelight, she appears. She's a child. That is the first and most devastating thing about the encounter. She has a child's directness, a child's honesty, a child's complete inability to understand that what she's telling you is horrifying. She talks about the night of the fire, with the matter-of-factness of someone recounting something that simply happened, without the framework of horror or grief that an adult would bring to it. The fire came, her mother was there, and then she wasn't there anymore. And now there's another who plays with her in the cemetery at night, and that one knows more about what happened but won't tell. What Helgi eventually says, once you've talked to her long enough, once the hide and seek is done, and she's standing before you, in the faint cold glow that wisps and ghosts produce against the dark, is that someone came and set the fire on purpose. Someone who was doing it for someone else. And the name she gives you, eventually, is Laelet. And the trail that follows from Laelet leads somewhere much darker. Laelet is a vampire thrall now, buried in the cemetery not far from where Helgi plays, dispatched there after her usefulness ended, and finding her and dealing with her is the second step in a story that keeps getting worse. Laelet was once a normal woman, the wife of a man named Thonir, who still lives in Morthal and still wakes up each morning not knowing that his wife is in the ground a short walk from his house. She was turned. She was given an order, and the order was, burn down Hrogar's house. Alva gave the order. Alva's house, if you break into it, if you slip inside while she's out and make your way down to the basement, that she really doesn't want anyone to see, contains a coffin. And in the coffin, or on the shelf beside it, is a journal. And the journal is the kind of document that changes the shape of everything you thought you understood. Alva is a vampire. She has been a vampire for a very long time, long enough that she approaches the problem of feeding with the detachment of someone thinking about a resource management problem, rather than something that involves the blood of living people. Morthal, to Alva, is a project, not a community, not a place, a resource to be organized. She has been working systematically on the guards, seducing them, cultivating them, moving them toward a state where they would serve her without knowing why. She has her eye on Gorm, the Jarl's personal bodyguard. She has been working on Benor. The process is slow and careful and, before you found the journal, entirely invisible. The burning of Hrogar's house was step one. Remove the obstacle, secure the thrall, establish a foothold. The master of the whole operation, the one whose name is in the journal and whose lair is to the northeast of Morthal, in a cave that the town's residents have presumably walked past many times without knowing what was inside, is a vampire named Movarth Piquine. He is old, very old, old enough that he appears in books from a previous era, which is a kind of immortality that most vampires don't achieve. He was once, before the long centuries changed him into something else entirely, a trainer in the Fighters Guild who became a vampire hunter. He studied the creatures. He became obsessed with understanding them, and at some point in that process, he became one. The irony of that is the kind of irony that would be almost darkly funny if it hadn't led directly to a small girl's ghost playing hide-and-seek in a cemetery. Movarth's lair is underground and full of his thralls, people who came to Morthal or passed through or were taken, now enslaved to something they can't name. They're not quite people anymore, in the way you need to think about it when you're moving through that cave, because otherwise the fighting is much harder. Movarth himself is at the back, in what passes for a throne room in vampire interior design, which is to say a large chamber with too many candles and furniture that's been down here long enough to smell of stone. He's not easy. He can turn invisible. He conjures things from the dark. He moves faster than he should for something so old and preternaturally calm. But he can be brought down, and when he is, the whole operation, the careful patient plan he and Alva constructed to turn Morthal into something they could feed from forever, dissolves with him. The townspeople who gathered outside and swore they'd fight, who then quietly declined to actually enter the cave because the reality of a vampire lair is different from the idea of one, get to go home. Thanir, who came with you, even knowing what his wife had become, gets to begin the long process of understanding what he lost and when he lost it, and whether those are even the same thing. And Helgi's ghost appears one last time as you leave the cave. She comes up from the ground or from the air or from wherever small ghosts come from, and she tells you that she and her mother can rest now, that she's ready to sleep, that the game is over. She fades. The marsh fog moves in off the water. The lights of Morthal glow warm and distant through the dark. She was 8 years old. She had a very small voice, even for a ghost. She said she was ready to sleep like a child who has been kept up far past bedtime and is grateful finally for the permission to close their eyes. Walk back to Morthal through the fog. The wooden walkways creak under your feet. The trees drag their branches in the water. Somewhere in the cemetery up the hill, there is just a set of small graves now, quiet in the ordinary way that graves are quiet. The Jarl will have a reward for you. She'll look at you with those eyes that see too much, and she'll say something about justice, about the town being safer now. And she'll be right, but the word that sits in your chest on the walk back out of Morthal and back into the marsh isn't anything as clean as justice. It's smaller than that, and gentler. It's the word that means a little girl finally got to sleep. Part 3. In my time of need, the impossible question, the bannered mare in Whiterun, is the closest thing Skyrim has to a neutral ground. People of all kinds pass through it. Merchants and mercenaries, travelers and locals, people with money, and people pretending to have money. The innkeeper, Hulda, has seen enough humanity to be unsurprised by most of it. She keeps the mead flowing and the fire going and she doesn't ask too many questions, which is why the bannered mare is where people who want to not be found tend to end up. Sadia is one of those people. She works there, waiting tables, and she is good at the work in the way that people who are hiding are often good at whatever work allows them to stay hidden. She is pleasant, she is efficient, She does not draw attention to herself, and the only sign that anything is out of the ordinary is the name she's using, which isn't hers. Her real name is Iman. She is a Redguard noblewoman from Hammerfell, from a house called Suda, and she fled Hammerfell because she spoke out against the Aldmeri Dominion and the Dominion, being the kind of organization that responds to criticism with attempted murder, sent people after her. She ended up in Skyrim because Skyrim is far from Hammerfell, and because the Bannered Mare needed someone to carry drinks, and because a new name is surprisingly easy to come by when you're willing to disappear entirely into someone else's life. This is her story. There is another story. It belongs to a group of warriors from Hammerfell, Ali Kur fighters in their characteristic robes, who have been turned away from the gates of Whiterun because they don't have the proper permits, and also because one of their number was arrested in the city for causing trouble. Their leader is named Kamatu, and his story is this. Iman, the woman calling herself Sadia, is a traitor. She sold information to the Aldmeri Dominion. Her testimony helped the Dominion take a city called Tanith. People died because of what she told them. And the warriors from Hammerfell have crossed the sea and traveled through Skyrim to find her and bring her back to face justice for it. That's his story. 2 stories. One person. No way to know which story is true. This is the engine of the quest called In My Time of Need, and it runs on the specific discomfort of being forced to make a consequential decision with incomplete information. Skyrim is full of choices, but most of them are at least categorically clear. You know who the bandits are. You know the dragon is the threat. You know the Thalmor are the problem. In My Time of Need doesn't give you that. It gives you 2 people, both of whom speak with conviction, both of whom have internal consistency to their account, and neither of whom you can fully verify. Sadia speaks with fear. Fear is something you can't fake entirely, and hers feels real. She describes what it was like to speak against the Dominion in Hammerfell, the isolation of it, the way that speaking a truth nobody wants to hear in a political climate that punishes truth creates a specific kind of loneliness. She says the warriors are killers sent by the Dominion itself, using the lie of her being a traitor as cover for the real agenda, which is silencing someone who spoke the wrong words. She says if Kamatu gets her, she dies. She's been running for years. She just wants to stay hidden. Kamatu speaks with dignity. He is not immediately aggressive. He doesn't attack you when you meet him in Swindler's Den, which is the cave where he and his warriors have been operating while they search Whiterun's hold for their quarry. He lays out his case with the measured patience of a soldier who has been pursuing a legitimate mission for a long time and is tired of explaining it to people who don't understand the politics. He says Sadia, Iman, gave information to the Dominion that cost lives. He says she deserves to answer for it in Hammerfell, among her own people. He says she's been running precisely because she knows what she did. You cannot verify either of them. The game doesn't have a magic mechanic that reveals lies. There are no documents you can find that settle it. The clues that exist in the world around the quest, the fact that the Alikir don't kill Sadia when Kamatu gets her, but only paralyzes her, as if taking her alive for trial rather than simply executing her on the spot, can be read either way. Either that's evidence Kamatu's telling the truth about wanting justice rather than murder, or it's evidence that the Dominion wants her alive for its own reasons. The community has argued about this quest since 2011. Hundreds of forum threads, detailed analyses of the dialogue, careful readings of the background lore about Hammerfell and the Dominion and the Great War. And none of it has definitively settled it. The game was designed this way on purpose. Bethesda gave the quest deliberately ambiguous architecture because the point isn't the answer. The point is the act of choosing without knowing. If you side with Sadia, you walk into Swindler's Den and fight Kamatu and his warriors and return to tell her it's done, and she pays you 500 gold and goes back to carrying drinks at the Bannered Mare. She's safe, for now. Whether she deserved to be is something you'll never know. If you side with Kamatu, you go back to Sadia and tell her she's in danger and that there's a horse waiting to take her to safety, and you lead her outside the gates of Whiterun, where Kamatu is waiting, and he paralyzes her and loads her onto that horse and disappears with her back toward the south. She calls you a murderer as the spell takes hold and she falls. Whether she was right is something you'll never know. The reward is the same both ways. 500 gold. That sameness is the subtlest thing about the quest. The way the game refuses to signal which choice was correct by giving them identical outcomes in terms of what you walk away with. Most games tilt their scales, give you slightly better loot for the right answer, dim the music for the wrong one. This one doesn't. You get 500 gold and a question that doesn't have an answer, and you carry it with you. What's interesting is how the quest treats the moral architecture of Hammerfell as a real thing, something that exists independently of your perspective. Hammerfell has its own justice system, its own honor culture, its own idea of what a traitor deserves and what process should follow. Kamatu isn't a barbarian. He's a man who believes in something that isn't Skyrim's law, but is still law. If Amon/Sadia is what he says she is, then his mission isn't murder, it's accountability. And accountability can look a lot like murder from the outside when you don't have the context. Meanwhile, Sadia/Iman, if she's telling the truth, is a refugee in the most complete sense. Someone who said the wrong thing to the wrong people, and lost everything, and crossed an ocean to stay alive, and is now living under a name that isn't hers, carrying drinks to people who will never know who she was. That life is its own kind of sentence regardless of what you choose. The quest ends either way. The question stays open. That's not an accident. That's a design choice. And it's one of the most honest things Skyrim does, admitting through the shape of this small story that the world is full of situations where you cannot know the truth, where you have to act anyway, and where the acting is the thing you'll have to live with. Walk back into the Bannered Mare after it's done. The fire is still going, the mead is still flowing, Hulda is still behind the bar not asking too many questions. Everything looks exactly the same. That's the strange part. It always does, after the choices you can't take back. Part 4. Ill Met by Moonlight. The Hunt in Falkreath. Falkreath is Skyrim's most morbid hold. That sounds harsh, but it's true in the very specific way that Falkreath itself seems to have accepted about its own nature. The way a person who has lived with something long enough stops trying to argue against it. The town has the largest graveyard in all of Skyrim, occupying a space that in any other settlement would be devoted to housing or commerce. The merchants there have named their businesses after the dead man's drink being the inn, the grave concoctions being the alchemist. The local priest spends most of his time in the cemetery saying rites over the newly arrived, because in Falkreath, the newly arrived are frequently horizontal. There is a reason for all of this, which is that Falkreath Hold is where wars have ended their last miles for centuries. The final battles of a dozen conflicts have been fought in those forested hills, and the dead don't decompose quickly in cold ground. And so, Falkreath accumulated its dead the way rivers accumulate silt, slowly and continuously until it simply became the nature of the place. In this context, a new grave shouldn't register, but this one does. The priest Runil is saying the last rites for a little girl named Lavinia when you first arrive. She was the only daughter of local farmers named Mathes and Indara, and she was killed by a laborer on the farm in the worst possible way, which the game communicates through the faces of her parents standing by the grave without saying it explicitly, because it doesn't need to. Mathes is hollowed. Indara is somewhere past grief and into a state that doesn't have a name. They answer your questions if you ask, quietly, with the specific verbal economy of people who have been crying for days and have run out of anything that isn't the bare fact of it. The laborer who killed her is named Sinding. He's in the jail. When you go to see him, he is not what you expect. He doesn't deny it. He doesn't deflect or lie. He tells you immediately what he is, a werewolf. And he tells you what happened, which is that he transformed and a child was in the wrong place. And he tells you why the transformation was uncontrolled, which is where the story gets complicated. He stole the ring of Hircine. Hircine is the Daedric prince of the hunt. He rules over a realm called the Hunting Grounds, a dimension of pure predation, and his relationship with werewolves is essentially one of patronage, he being the source of the beast blood that flows in their veins, the distant authority behind every transformation. His ring exists in the world in various forms at various times, a shifting artifact that can provide some control over the change, and Sinding decided to take it because he couldn't stop transforming, and he thought it might help. It didn't help. Hircine cursed the ring in response to the theft, and a cursed ring of Hircine doesn't give you control over the change. It removes what little control remains. Sinding was worse after taking it than before, transforming at random and without warning, and Lavinia was there during one of those randoms. And now she's in the ground in Falkreath's considerable cemetery, and Sinding is in a cell, and Hircine is displeased about his ring being in the possession of someone unworthy. He gives you the ring. It clamps onto your wrist the moment you take it. impossible to remove. And if you're a werewolf yourself, the cursed thing starts making you shift unpredictably. He transforms and breaks through the cell wall and runs, heading for a place in the forests north of the city called Bloated Man's Grotto, and he leaves you holding a cursed ring and a problem. The white stag is in the forests outside Falkreath. It's a creature sacred to Hircine, legendarily large, moving through the trees with the grace of something that knows it's watched but doesn't care, and killing it is how you get Hircine's attention. You'll find it by following the quest marker into the denser part of the hold, where the pine trees grow close together and the light comes through in columns rather than in sheets, gold in the late afternoon, and then gray as the afternoon gives way to evening. The stag is everything the name suggests. Pale as birchwood, enormous, moving through the forest like something that belongs to a different quality of light than the ordinary world. It will run when you approach. That's not cowardice, it's the dignity of something sacred. It's not for everyone to simply walk up to. You have to demonstrate that you mean it, that you're willing to move through the forest at the stag's pace and close the distance through actual effort, rather than just stumbling upon it. When you bring it down, Hircine appears, not fully. An aspect of him, a fragment of the prince made visible, speaking through the dead stag or beside it in a voice that has the specific quality of voices that are much larger than the bodies they seem to be coming from. He tells you what he wants. Sinding is in Bloated Man's Grotto. Other hunters are already there. Bring back his hide. Bloated Man's Grotto is a beautiful place in a terrible circumstance sort of way. The cave opens into a grotto that is almost bowl-shaped, the walls rising steeply to a ragged opening of sky, trees growing in the bowl and a blood-red full moon hanging over it all, the moon that werewolves have always had complicated feelings about. The hunters are dead by the time you arrive, mostly. The Khajiit named Jakir is the last of them, barely alive by a small fire, and he dies shortly after you reach him. Sinding is at the top of the grotto, standing on a ledge under that red moon, and he is not trying to escape. He is watching the sky. He turns when he hears you come up the path, and he looks at you, the way people look at each other when they both understand that something final is approaching, and he makes his offer. Spare him. Let him live here in this grotto, away from people, away from any possibility of the accident that killed Lavinia happening again. He will never come near a settlement. He will never risk another child. He has enough self-knowledge now to understand what he is and what the cost of him being among people is, and he would like to pay that cost through absence rather than through a knife between his shoulder blades on Hircine's behalf. You can kill him. Hircine will appear, pleased, and will give you the Savior's hide, an armor piece made from Sinding's skin, which is a gift with a specific flavor to it that says a great deal about who and what Hircine is. The ring comes off. You've done what the Daedric Prince wanted, or you can spare him, stand with him against the remaining hunters who come up through the grotto, fight them side by side, and then walk out into the night with a clear head and an uncursed ring as your reward. Because Hircine, unexpectedly, is pleased by this outcome too. Not because Sinding survived, but because the hunt was good. Because there was a real choice at the end, a real moment of decision, and because a prince of the hunt understands that the most interesting hunts are the ones where the prey has a chance. The Ring of Hircine, uncursed, lets you transform into a werewolf once more each day. That's its practical function. But the way you received it, whether you skinned someone to get it or stood with them instead, is something the ring carries even if the ring itself doesn't know it. There's a moment after you leave Bloated Man's Grotto, and the night air is cold and the moon is still red. And somewhere in that grotto, a werewolf is looking at the sky and breathing and not being dead. And you have the ring in your pocket or on your hand. And Hircine is presumably somewhere in his infinite hunting ground, being satisfied or puzzled, or both. And Falkreath is down the road with its enormous cemetery, and its dead-named buildings, and its farmers standing next to a small grave. The hunt happened. It ended. Whether it ended right is the question Hircine leaves open on purpose. Everything is a hunt to him, including the question. Part 5. The Forsworn Conspiracy and No One Escapes Sidna Mine. Markarth is built in a wound. That is the most precise way to describe it. The city sits inside a massive cleft in the rock of the Reach, the buildings carved directly into the stone face of the cliff and the canyon below, stacked on each other in the precarious architecture of a place that was built by something other than human hands. The Dwemer built Markarth. The city is, at its foundations, a Dwemer ruin with Nordic city layered on top of it, which means that if you look closely at the stonework, the walls, the floors under your feet, you're always looking at two things at once, what it is now and what it used to be, overlapping. This doubling is true of everything about Markarth. You arrive, if you're doing this questline right, on a market day or something close to it, and within the first few minutes of walking through the gate you witness a murder. A forsworn agent, dressed to pass as a civilian, attacks a woman in the market square in front of everyone. If you stop it in time, she survives. If you don't, she doesn't. Either way, a man named Eltries presses a note into your hand in the chaos and asks you to meet him at the Shrine of Talos. The note asks you to find out what the Forsworn are doing in Markarth, why a Forsworn agent was in the city, who they work for inside the walls. Eltris is the son of a man who was killed by the Forsworn, and he has been quietly asking questions for years, and the questions have gotten him far enough that he needs someone with better combat skills and fewer local attachments to take the next steps. What follows is an investigation that unpacks one of the more complicated political situations in Skyrim, which is saying something given that the entire province is essentially a political situation that has been escalating for several hundred years. The Forsworn are the indigenous people of the Reach. That's the fact that the city of Markarth and the Silverblood family, who effectively run it, would very much prefer you not think about too hard. They are the descendants of the Reachmen, the Bretons and pre-Breton peoples who lived in the Reach before the Nords came. They had their own civilization, their own gods, their own way of organizing themselves. And then the Nords arrived, and the Reach was absorbed into the political structure of Skyrim, and the Reachmen's way of life became illegal, and their worship was banned, and their land was redistributed. A few decades before the events of Skyrim, they rose up, took Markarth, drove the Nords out, had, for a brief window, their own city, a place called the Markarth Incident in the history books, though from the Reachmen's perspective it was simply a moment of having what had always been theirs. Then Ulfric Stormcloak arrived with his warriors and his voice, and drove them back out. And the Jarl, in exchange for allowing Talos worship in Markarth as a condition of Ulfric's aid, arrested the Forsworn and their leader, a man named Modonok, and things went back to what Nords call normal and Reachmen call occupation. Modonok was to be executed. But a man named Thonar Silverblood had other ideas. The Silverbloods are the family that owns most of what matters in Markarth, the mines, the inn, the political influence, the guards' loyalty. Thonar saw in Modonok a resource. The king in rags, as people called him, had influence over the Forsworn outside the walls. If you keep the king alive and imprisoned, you have leverage. The Forsworn want their leader free, and wanting something badly enough makes you cooperative. So, Modonok didn't die. He went into Sidna Mine, which is the prison that is also a silver mine, where prisoners work off their sentences in the old Nordic tradition of forced labor. And he went in and he never came out. But he kept running the Forsworn from inside the walls anyway, through messengers, through the guards Thonar had in his pocket, through the slow, patient machinery of someone who has decided that the long game is the only game worth playing. Your investigation leads you through Nepos' house, where an old man who seems like a harmless elder turns out to be a Forsworn contact who has no intention of letting you leave knowing what you know. It leads you to Alva-style evidence, documents, and journals that describe the conspiracy in careful detail. It leads you, eventually, to the Shrine of Talos, where Eltris has been waiting for you. Eltris is dead when you get there. The corrupt guards killed him, and they arrest you on the spot, charging you with his murder, and you are stripped of your weapons and your armor and everything else you came to Markarth with, and you are dropped into Sidna Mine in rags with nothing but your bare hands and whatever skills you've accumulated. The mine is not immediately terrifying. It is dim, carved out of the rock in the pragmatic Dwemer style, and it smells of stone dust and cold water and the specific unwashed smell of people living in close quarters with no privacy. The other prisoners are Forsworn, almost to a man, the fighters and sympathizers who ended up here through Thonar's system of maintaining the threat contained underground. They are not immediately hostile to you. But they're not friendly either. You're an outsider in a very enclosed space with very established social hierarchies, and the first thing you learn is that if you want to speak to Modonok, the king in rags, you're going to have to earn that access through the social structure of the mine. Borkul the Beast guards the door to Modonok's private cell. He is an orc, large even by orcish standards, and his particular currency is a shiv, which you can obtain from a prisoner named Grisvar the Unlucky, who will trade it to you for skooma, which you can get from a source further in the mine. The whole economy of Sidna Mine runs on this kind of exchange. Small objects and small debts, the currency of people who have nothing but time. Madanach, when you reach him, is not what the Silverbloods would prefer you to see. He is not a monster. He is an old man in a stone cell who has been sitting in that cell for long enough that the stone has learned the shape of him. And he is sharp, startlingly sharp, with the particular intelligence of people who have had nothing to do but think for years and have made good use of the opportunity. He tells you his version of the history of the Reach. He introduces you to Breg, another prisoner whose story adds texture and weight to what Madanach is describing. A family killed, a history of dispossession, a grief that runs back generations. He offers you a way out. He knows how to escape, has known for a long time, has been waiting for the right moment. But he wants proof of your commitment first. The escape requires moving through the ancient Dwemer ruins beneath the mine, fighting through automatons that have been operating on Dwemer logic for centuries, and emerging into Markarth itself, at which point you have weapons returned to you by Kai, a forsworn contact who slipped into the city, and the confrontation with Thonar plays out in the daylight of a city that is watching its carefully managed situation collapse. You can kill Madanach in his cell and escape alone, betraying the Forsworn for Thonar's reward, a ring and some gold, and the continued operation of the Silverblood family's particular arrangement. Or you can escape with Madanach, watch the Forsworn flood out into Markarth's streets and tear through the Silverblood guards, and see the king in rags step into the light of a city he lost decades ago, even if only for a few minutes before moving on. Madanach will give you something called the Armor of the Old Gods if you leave with him. It's good armor, and it carries the name of the Reach's pre-Nordic pantheon, the old things the Reachmen worshipped before those gods were banned. There's a quiet defiance in that name even on the armor's tag. Markarth stands after either ending. The Silverbloods are still there, or mostly there. The Forsworn are still in the hills. The political situation hasn't changed in any fundamental way, because one escaped prisoner and one helped quest don't change political situations in fundamental ways. But you know the history now. You know what the carved stone walls of Markarth were before they were Markarth. You know the name of the king who sat in a mine for decades rather than stop being king. You know the name of the little girl in the cell who lost her father to a political calculus she was too young to understand. That knowledge sits in you differently than the generic quest completion does. It makes Markarth's beautiful, terrible skyline look different when you walk back through the gate. The Dwemer stones and the Nordic city on top of them. The wound that has been inhabited for so long it looks like architecture. Two things at once, always. The thing it is, and the thing it was. Part 6, The Forbidden Legend and the Brothers of the Galdur Amulet. There are books in Skyrim, hundreds of them, and most players walk past them. The in-game library is massive, and a lot of it is deeply dry, historical accounts and herbalism guides and treatises on the metaphysics of the arcane university. Things that are valuable as world building, but not necessarily compelling to stop and read when there's a dragon on the horizon. But a few of the books are genuinely gripping, and one of them is called Lost Legends. Lost Legends is available in several places, but the most accessible copy is in Dragon's Reach, Whiterun's Jarl Hall, in the library of the court mage Farengar. It sits on a shelf next to a dozen drier titles, and it doesn't announce itself as anything special, just another history text in a province full of history. But what it describes, if you sit down and read it, is one of the Merethic era's great crimes, buried deep enough in the historical record that it's essentially mythological, a story that has blurred the line between fact and legend over the millennia until most scholars treat it as pure fiction. The story is about a man named Galdur, who was the court mage of High King Harald, one of the earliest and most powerful rulers in unified Nordic history. Galdur was old enough and learned enough that he had accumulated a kind of power that made even the High King nervous, though Harald kept the nervousness private because the mage was useful, and loyalty in court mages is hard to maintain if you're openly frightened of them. Galdur had 3 sons. The sons saw the power the father held, and they wanted it. They wanted it the way people want things, when the wanting is not about the thing itself, but about the story of having it, about what it means to possess what someone else has built. Galdur had spent a lifetime becoming what he was. His sons wanted to skip the lifetime. They killed him. Together, apparently, or in succession, the historical record being somewhat unclear because the whole incident was deliberately suppressed almost immediately after it happened. They took his amulet, which was not just a piece of jewelry, but a vessel for the magical power he'd spent decades accumulating, and they divided it. 3 pieces, 3 brothers, each taking a share of their father's poor, and dispersing to different corners of what would become Skyrim. And then the High King had them hunted down and killed, because what they did was not just patricide, but a disruption of the magical order that ran through the court and extended outward. He had them sealed in ancient tombs, each brother in a different place, each tomb sealed with the kind of Nordic burial ceremony that was meant to make it permanent. And he had the entire story erased from the official record, because even in death, the brothers were too dangerous to commemorate. The erasing mostly worked, which is why the story is in a book of lost legends rather than in the standard histories. It survived as myth, as ghost story, as the kind of tale that gets passed between scholars who specialize in the parts of history that powerful people preferred to forget. The 3 locations where the brothers are interred span Skyrim's geography in a way that suggests the High King's advisors were deliberate about putting distance between them. Folgunthor is in the coastal lowlands southwest of Solitude, near the sea, an ancient tomb with the specific smell of places that have been sealed for longer than civilization has been counting. Sayarthal is up in the north, one of the oldest Nordic settlements in existence, so old that the College of Winterhold has an archaeological dig running there, because even Sarthal's ruins are ruins built on top of older ruins. And Geirmund's Hall is on an island in the middle of a lake east of Ivarstead, accessible by swimming or by small boat, surrounded by cold water that keeps casual visitors away. Each tomb has kept its occupant. That's the impressive thing, the frightening thing. The brothers died more than 3,000 years ago, and they are still in those tombs, still present in whatever form the dead maintain when they've been buried with this much ceremonial care. They're not alive, but they're not gone either. They occupy that Nordic state of something like undeath that isn't quite the shambling horror of common Draugr, but is older, more deliberate, more purposeful. Jirik Galderson is in Sarthal. The College of Winterhold's excavation into Sarthal is partially what triggers this thread, since the archaeologists have dug far enough that they're starting to run into things that were buried with intention, things that push back when disturbed. Jirik is one of those things. He is powerful in the way that someone carrying a third of a legendary mage's accumulated power is powerful, magic-resistant during certain phases of the encounter, throwing lightning and frost and fire with the casual ease of someone who has had millennia to practice. He's been in that tomb with his fragment of the amulet, and his accumulated resentment, and the specific grudge of someone who was caught and executed and knows it. Sigdis Galderson is in Geirmund's Hall on his island. He has a different approach to the problem of someone coming for his fragment, duplicating himself, creating echo images of himself that are real enough to fight back but don't have the amulet. Finding the real one requires paying attention to the details, the specific way each version moves, the slight differences in behavior that distinguish the original from the copies. Mikrul Galdorsson is in Folgunthor, nearest the sea, with a host of Draugr at his command that suggest he's had the longest time to develop an entourage. He is perhaps the most straightforwardly terrifying of the 3, moving through his ancient tomb with the authority of something that has been here since before the stone was a ruin, before anyone thought to come looking. You fight all 3. You collect all 3 fragments. And then you go to the tomb where Galder himself was buried, Reachwater Rock, deep in the mountains, and in that place you face all 3 brothers simultaneously, their power combined against you, in the room where their father's memory still lingers in the carved stone. When they fall, Galder himself manifests, his ghost. It carries with it the specific quality of ghosts that have been patient, that have waited for something to resolve for so long that the waiting has become a kind of discipline. He reassembles his amulet and blesses the Dragonborn with it, because someone who tracked down 3 ancient and dangerous spirits and defeated them and restored what was taken deserves what was taken. The Galder amulet grants 30 points each to health, stamina, and magicka. In practical terms, it's one of the best accessories in the game, period. Genuinely powerful across any build. But the way it sits in your inventory afterward is different from other gear, heavier somehow, even though game items have no weight beyond their numeric value. It's the weight of the story behind it. of a mage who spent a lifetime becoming something and had it taken by people who wanted what he'd built without doing the building. It was his. He made it from his work. And he gave it to you because you gave him something that centuries of waiting hadn't managed to provide, which was an ending. His ghost fades. The old tomb breathes its cold, deep stone air around you. 3,000 years of a story that was supposed to be forgotten. You carry it out into the light. Part 7. Kind's Sacred Trials, the Old God and the Hunter's Oath. There is a shack in the rift, up in the mountains in the hard part of the terrain where most travelers don't go without a reason, because the rift's mountains have the quality of mountains that have never particularly cared whether people found them navigable or not. The shack is weathered and small, and full of hunting trophies, pelts and skulls and antlers arranged with the specific care that a person who has been alone for a long time brings to whatever they love most. It smells of wood smoke and old leather, and the good, honest smell of a place where someone has been making the best of things for years without expecting anyone to notice. The man inside is named Froki Whetted Blade, and he is old. Not old in the way that some NPCs are old, with the soft vagueness of background characters given an age trait, but specifically, precisely old, with the particular thinness of people who have lived outdoors in physical conditions for their entire lives and whose bodies have distilled down to exactly what's necessary. He has a grandson, a boy named Homing, who is there too, quieter, watching his grandfather, with the attention of a child who has decided that this person is the most interesting thing in the world. Froki worships Kine. Kine is not one of the 8, the divines sanctioned by the Empire, taught in the temples, prayed to in the shrines that dot every hold capital. She is older than the 8. She is the Nordic form of Kinnereth, the goddess of air and sky and storms, but she is also something the imperial Kinnereth is not, which is the goddess of the hunt, the divine force behind the relationship between predator and prey, behind the specific moment when a hunter draws a bow and breathes out, and the world goes very quiet. The Imperials replaced her with their own more civilized version of air divinity. The old Nords, the ones before the Concordat and before the Empire, had opinions about what you should worship, called on Kine before the hunt. Froki still does. Froki has always done. He watched the old ways erode around him, watched the temples shift their dedications, watched neighbors who once knew Kine's name stop speaking it, and he retreated up into his mountain shack and kept the old ways himself, with the stubbornness of someone who has decided that a thing's survival depends on him specifically. He's not angry about it. That's important. He's not a fanatic in the Rage and Manifesto sense. He's just an old hunter who loves what he loves and has held on to it. He will tell you about Kine's sacred trials if you sit and talk to him long enough, if you demonstrate the patience that the shack and its residents seem to require. The trials are the ancient test of a hunter's worth, a ceremony that has been passed down from Froki's father and his father before him, and so far back that the specific origin is lost. The idea is simple, though the execution is not. You go to places where creatures of Kine's domain live, and you hunt the guardian spirits of those creatures, the sacred echoes of the animals themselves, translucent and pale, and carrying a particular quality that ordinary animals don't have. They are ghosts in a sense, or they are more than ghosts. They are the idea of the wolf, the idea of the skeever, the idea of the mud crab, made temporarily visible and vulnerable, given form so that a hunter can meet them properly and either prove worthy or not. The first tier is smaller creatures. A guardian mud crab in the southeast of Whiterun Hold, near Jukar's monument, a landmark that is itself a piece of history, a monument to a battle so old it exists mostly as a name. The mud crab's spirit is pale and translucent, visible if you know to look for it, but invisible to ordinary eyes, and it is stronger than a normal mud crab in the specific way that sacred things are stronger than their ordinary versions, not dramatically, but perceptibly, with an aura of something that resists the first blow and requires respect. A guardian skeever near the windward ruins in the Pale, in that stretch of territory that is simultaneously desolate and beautiful, in the specific way that places without much human habitation tend to be. The windward ruins are old enough that nobody living knows what they were for originally. The skeever spirit haunts the area around them. A guardian wolf at an unmarked den southwest of the Guardian Stones, in the forests of Falkreath Hold, where the trees grow dark and close, and wolf sign is easy to find even without the quest pointing you toward it. The wolf spirit watches from between the trees before it attacks. That moment of observation that real wolves do before they commit. The pause of a predator making a decision. Froki sends you back out after you return from the first tier. The trials have 2 stages, and the second is harder because what Kine is really testing isn't whether you can kill something. She's testing whether you can kill something that matters, whether you can bring serious predatory intent to bear against something that commands the landscape it inhabits. A guardian saber, cat in Winterhold, near Bleak Coast Cave, where the terrain opens up toward the sea, and the wind comes off the water with the full force of everything north of Skyrim applied to the shoreline. A guardian mammoth west of Loreus Farm in Whiterun Hold, which is a statement about scale because a ghostly mammoth spirit at full size is not something that ordinary hunters encounter. And it requires a genuine shift in approach. You are small, and it is not. A guardian bear in Falkreath, south of Knife Point Ridge, in the part of the hold where the timber is densest and the bear sign is everywhere, and the feeling of being watched is hard to shake. And then the final trial. Kine's Troll Champion, inside Greywinter Watch, which is a cave near the Ritual Stone and Whiterun Hold. The troll spirit is inside with 2 ordinary trolls as company, which means the approach requires either bravery that borders on recklessness or genuine tactical patience, and there is something fitting about that, about the final test being the hardest configuration, the most honest test of whether you've earned what Froki is offering. Trolls are deeply vulnerable to fire. Every hunter in Skyrim knows this. It's the thing about trolls, the one reliable counter to their regeneration, their durability, their aggression. Fire makes them hesitate, makes them flinch, makes the math of the encounter workable. In Greywinter Watch, fire is your friend, and the ancient teaching of Kine that fire and sky are connected, that she who rules the storms also rules the flame, isn't just mythology here, it's a practical tactic. When you return to Froki with all trials complete, he gives you Kine's token. It's an amulet. It reduces damage from animals by 10% and increases bow damage by 5%. In raw numbers, that's modest, but numbers aren't really the point of what Froki has given you. He calls you his friend when he gives it. He looks at you with those old clear eyes and he says that you've proven yourself worthy of the old ways and that Kine has seen it. And there's nothing theatrical about the delivery. He means it simply. He has been the last keeper of something for a long time, and someone came and completed the ceremony that he has been holding in trust, and now it's been passed on. Haming, the grandson, watches from across the room. He's going to grow up in that shack with his grandfather and the pelts and the old ways and probably carry this forward himself when it comes to that. The sacred trials will survive. That's not a small thing. In Skyrim, the number of things that were lost when the old ways went under is considerable. The fact that an old man in a mountain shack kept this one alive through sheer obstinate love of it, that it exists to be given to someone who came looking, is its own quiet victory against the long erosion of everything that doesn't fit the current political arrangement. Kine is still in the mountains. She has always been there. The storms over the throat of the world are hers. The hawks that circle the high places are hers. The moment before the arrow releases, when the breath is out and the world is completely still, that's hers too. She doesn't need a temple. She has the sky. Part 8. Frostflow Abyss. What the lighthouse keeper knew, there is a lighthouse on the coast between Dawnstar and Winterhold, standing on a promontory where the land ends and the Sea of Ghosts begins, and it is called Frostflow Lighthouse. It is exactly what the name suggests. A stone tower on a rocky coast, with a lamp at the top designed to cast its light across the dark water and warn ships away from the rocks, and around it a small collection of outbuildings that served as living quarters for whoever was charged with keeping the lamp burning. It is empty now. That's the first thing you notice. The lighthouse is standing, the lamp housing intact, the outbuildings undamaged. But there is no one home in the way that houses go wrong rather than right. The door isn't locked. The furniture hasn't been looted. The personal items of a family, which is what this was, a family came here and tried to build a life at the edge of the world, are still in place. A book on a shelf. A child's toy near the hearth. A cup that someone set down and didn't pick up. But no one is here. The quest called Frostflow Abyss begins not with a conversation or a book or a stranger pressing a note into your hand. It begins simply by entering the lighthouse and standing in the central room and seeing it. The visual storytelling does the work of a long introduction. Something went wrong here, and the evidence of it is in the ordinary things being in their ordinary places and nobody present to be with them. There are journals. There are always journals in Skyrim because the people who lived through difficult things had a tendency to write them down, possibly because writing is one of the ways that human beings try to make sense of things that don't make sense, try to put the unmanageable into a form that can be held and examined. The journals at Frostflow Lighthouse belong to a man named Hobd, who brought his family here to tend the light, his wife Ragna, their son Sudi, their daughter Mani. The journals don't begin badly. The first entries have the quality of a new beginning, of a family that has moved to a remote and challenging place and is making peace with the difficulty of it. The work is hard, the cold is severe, the isolation takes getting used to, but the lamp gets lit and the light goes out over the water, and there's satisfaction in that, in having a function that matters, in being the thing that keeps ships from the rocks. And then Sudi goes missing. He was exploring the cellar. The lighthouse has a cellar. The cellar has a passage. The passage leads down into the rock of the coast itself, into the cave system that underlies the promontory. And in that cave system are things that have been there since before the lighthouse was built. Falmer, which is what Skyrim calls the former snow elves, the beings that were blinded and degraded and driven underground by generations of Dwemer cruelty until they became something barely recognizable as the sophisticated elven civilization they came from. The passage that Sudi found, the one the lighthouse was built over without anyone apparently knowing, leads deep into a system of Falmer-inhabited caves. The Falmer that live there have never seen the surface in living memory. They live in the deep, in the dark, in the chitinous smell of the underground, and they are dangerous in the specific way that things are dangerous when they have no context for the world above, and no particular reason to spare anything that comes into their territory. Sudi didn't come back. Ragna went after him. The journal records the decision with a mother's brevity, a flat statement of intent, no drama, just, "I'm going to find my son." Habdi waited. Habdi kept the lamp burning because keeping the lamp burning was what he came here to do, and stopping would mean something had ended. He waited and kept the lamp burning, and his wife and son didn't come back. Then he went down too. His last journal entry is near the entrance to the cellar passage. He has a torch. He is going in. He understands that this is likely to go wildly. He writes it anyway because someone should know what happened if it comes to that. The caves below the lighthouse are not large, as Frostflow caves go, but they are not kind. The Falmer have nesting areas down here, territories defined by the specific biology and sociology of creatures who have lived underground for so long that the concepts of territory and boundary that surface dwellers use don't quite apply. They attack with the aggression of things that have no reason to expect an encounter to go any direction other than violent. What you find, as you move deeper, is the family. In pieces, in the most literal and awful sense. Ragna first, then Sudi. And at the deepest point, in the part of the cave that the Chorus, the enormous spider-like creatures that the Falmer keep, have made their particular territory, you find Hobd. He's not dead in the way the others are dead. He's been turned into something else, which is the specific horror the Chorus reserve for certain of their prey, a process that involves making something into a host. He doesn't survive the encounter. The lamp keeper who kept the light burning even when everything else was failing doesn't get to live. What you find on his body is a key and a final note. The note is for whoever comes after, whoever finds this place, and it is as quiet and straightforward as the rest of his journal, a request to light the lamp, to keep it burning. Because ships are still out there on the sea of ghosts, and they still need the warning. You go back up to the lighthouse, you climb the stairs that the family climbed every night to tend the lamp. You light it. The reward is called Sailor's Repose. It's a permanent ability. Healing spells you cast heal 10% more than they otherwise would. The game gives it to you as if the lighthouse itself is grateful, or as if whatever divine force governs lighthouses and the people who keep them has noticed what you did and said something in return. It stacks with other healing bonuses. It's genuinely useful. But the name is the thing that matters, the specific word choice, Sailor's Repose, suggesting that the rest the sailors get when they see the light and know they're not going to die on the rocks is a form of grace. Hobd wanted that grace for strangers he'd never meet. He kept the lamp burning for them, even after his family was gone. That is a kind of love that expands outward beyond the people who are present. a love for strangers who need warning more than they need company. The light goes out over the sea of ghosts, cold and steady, doing what it was made to do. The lighthouse keeper would have approved. Part 9, Lost to the Ages, Katria's Ghost and the Ethereum Forge, in the mountains of the Reach, southeast of Dushnik Yol, where the orc stronghold sits against the stone, and the terrain becomes the kind of hostile that requires actual scrambling rather than just walking carefully. There is a set of Dwemer ruins called Arking Thoms. The name itself has the compound, technical quality of all Dwemer naming, functional and architectural and ancient. The ruins are not on the main roads. They are not near anything that would draw ordinary traffic. They exist in the mountains because the Dwemer built where the Dwemer decided to build, and the Dwemer had no particular interest in making their work accessible to people who came later. The first time you enter, a voice tells you to turn back. It's a woman's voice, young and urgent, and it has the quality of a voice that has been trying to say this for a long time to people who don't listen. A quality of familiar frustration. The voice belongs to Katria. She's a ghost, which the visual presentation makes clear when she fully materializes, translucent and pale in the Dwemer stone light, with the expression of someone who is both glad to see another person and immediately concerned about what that person is going to do. Her story comes out in fragments, the way all stories come out when someone is simultaneously trying to warn you and explain their own situation. She was an explorer, a scholar specifically, the kind who combines academic rigor with genuine physical courage, and goes to the dangerous places in person rather than theorizing about them from a library. She had spent years studying Dwemer civilization, accumulating expertise that was, at the time of her death, the most comprehensive in Skyrim, possibly in Tamriel. She had a research partner named Taron Dreth. They worked together. She discovered things and shared them with him because that's what research partners do. And then he wrote a book called The Ethereum Wars and put his name on it, and it became the definitive text on Dwemer history in Skyrim, and none of Katria's contributions appeared in it, because Taron Dreth was the kind of scholar who views other people's work as a resource to be mined rather than an intellectual relationship to be honored. She was in Arking Thams, trying to follow up on her own research, the research that had become his book when the earthquake hit. The ruin shook, stone fell. She died before she could publish anything, before she could prove any of it was hers, and now she's a ghost in the ruin where she died, and Taron Dreth is somewhere in Skyrim being celebrated as an expert. She wants to finish what she started. That's the simplest way to put it. She wants to find the Ethereum Forge and prove that her research was right, that the things she discovered were real and not just the imaginings of someone who spent too long in dark tunnels. She can't do it alone. She's a ghost. She can accompany you, advise you, point out the architectural details that her years of research have taught her to read, but she can't pick up a weapon or open a lock or carry a shard. You're going to need 4 shards. Ethereum is a Dwemer material, crystalline and blue, with properties that sit at the intersection of magic and engineering in the way that Dwemer technology generally does, making the line between those two categories hard to find. The ancient Dwemer city-states of Skyrim, there were 4 of them. Arking Thams itself, Bathalft, Raldbithar, and Deepfolk Crossing fought what the history books call the Ethereum Wars over control of the substance. The wars were catastrophic. They accelerated the collapse of Dwemer civilization in Skyrim. Each city-state had shard of the Ethereum crest, the combined key that would open the legendary forge. And when the wars ended and the city-states fell, the shards were scattered. They have been scattered ever since. Arking Thams' shard is at the summit of the ruin, past a tonal lock, which is one of the Dwemer's architectural security systems, a puzzle built on resonance rather than mechanics, requiring the right combination of activations to open a door that no ordinary key can touch. Katria knows how to read the tonal architecture, the specific resonances of the Dwemer construction, and she guides you through it with the patience of someone for whom this knowledge is second nature, even in death. The other 3 shards require traveling across Skyrim. Raldbithar is northeast of Dawnstar, built into the mountains of the Pale, deep and complex and full of automaton guardians still doing their eternal job. Bethalft's shard is near an ancient alchemy lab at a location called the Ruins of Bethalft. Deep Folk Crossing is in the Reach proper, near a remote Dwemer bridge at an unmarked location where the river runs fast and the mountains crowd close on both sides. Each location has its particular character, its particular texture of abandoned engineering, its particular complement of dangers. But through all of them, Katria accompanies you, pointing things out, explaining architectural choices that would otherwise be inscrutable, filling in the context that makes the ruins feel like places where things happened, rather than just obstacle courses filled with metal enemies. She talks about the Dwemer the way someone talks about a civilization they have spent their life trying to understand, with the mixture of admiration and frustration that genuine scholarship produces. They were extraordinary engineers. They were also arrogant in ways that contributed directly to their disappearance. They built beautiful things and terrible things, and frequently the beautiful and the terrible were the same object. The Ethereum Forge is in the ruins of Bethalft, underground. Reach through a hidden entrance that reveals itself only when the 4 shards are combined into the Ethereum crest and placed in the correct mechanism. The ruins have bandits when you first arrive, which Katria regards with the mild irritation of a scholar who has arrived at an important site to find it occupied by people with no appreciation for what they're standing on. Once they're dealt with, and the crest is assembled, and the mechanism is triggered, the ground shakes, and a hidden lift shaft erupts upward from the earth, revealing the entrance. The forge room is beautiful. It's set in a massive cavern, with Ethereum flowing in channels through the floor and walls. The same blue crystal you've been collecting for shards, but here ambient and active and alive, in the way that water is alive. The forge itself is a Dwemer construction of considerable complexity, designed to work this specific material into specific objects, powered by the geological heat below and by the resonances of the Dwemer architecture surrounding it. The Forge Master stands between you and the forge. It's a dwarven centurion of particular size and aggression, a guardian purpose-built for this location, and it requires serious commitment to put down. But it can be put down, and when it falls, Katria looks at the forge with an expression that ghosts don't usually wear, which is something like vindication mixed with sadness, mixed with a kind of joy that has to coexist with the knowledge of what it cost. She's been right all along. The forge is real. The research was real. The book Tarandreth published with his name on it contained her discoveries, her years of work, and they were true. You can make one of 3 items. The Ethereum Crown, which allows you to wear 2 standing stone powers simultaneously. The Ethereum Shield, which can make enemies ethereal and unable to attack. The Ethereum Staff, which summons Dwemer automatons as allies. Each of them is genuinely powerful in different ways, and the choice of which to create is determined by the kind of character you're running and what would serve you best. Katria watches you forge it. She watches the Ethereum shape itself under the ancient machines operation, watches the finished object come into existence, and she says, very quietly, that she's glad you found this, that it tells the story, that it's proof, even if nobody will know the whole story behind it, that the research was real, that the discovery was made. Her ghost begins to fade. This was what she needed. This was the unfinished business that kept her in the ruins where she died, the thing that had to be completed before she could stop being here. The forge is real. The work was real. It's done. She fades gently, with the specific quality of a ghost that has accepted something, rather than one that has been interrupted. It doesn't look like death. It looks like someone leaving on a journey they've been waiting to take. You walk out of the forge with a Dwemer artifact that cannot be replicated, and the knowledge that the greatest Dwemer scholar of her era got credit for her own discovery after all, even if nobody but you and her ghost will ever know exactly how. The ruins of Bethalft breathe the cold mountain air as you emerge. The artifact is in your pack. The crest that brought you here has been used, its purpose fulfilled. Somewhere, presumably, Tarandreth is still going around calling himself an expert. The mountains don't care, neither, finally, does Katria. Part 10. The gentle quests, love, devotion, and the shapes of small stories. There are quests in Skyrim that are famous for difficulty or moral complexity or scale, and then there are quests that are famous for none of those things. Quests that proceed through the world quietly and arrive somewhere gentle, and these are the ones that are often hardest to explain to someone who hasn't played them, because the things they give you aren't easily categorized. The Book of Love is one of these. It begins in the Temple of Mara in Riften, which is Skyrim's city of cynicism and crime, and the canals that run through it, that smell of whatever canals smell of, when they run through a city of cynicism and crime. Riften is managed by Maven Blackbriar, which means it's managed by the Thieves Guild, which means the city's official institutions are mostly decorations over a criminal infrastructure. The Temple of Mara exists in this context as something genuinely incongruous, a place devoted to love and compassion in a city that specializes in neither. The priestess Dinya Balu will set you on the quest if you ask her about Mara's work. She has a gentle directness about her, the quality of someone who has chosen to do something earnest in a cynical place, and has made peace with how that looks. She'll tell you that Mara's work is spreading love in a world that has too little of it, and she'll send you to 3 places in Skyrim where love has been blocked or broken, to intervene in the specifically Mara-approved way, which is not violent. This is a quest with no combat. That distinction matters. In a game where almost everything resolves through fighting, the Book of Love asks you to have conversations, deliver messages, speak honestly to people about what they want and what's standing between them and having it. It's a different kind of agency. The first situation is in Iverstead, a quiet mill town at the base of the throat of the world. There is a young man who is in love with a young woman and has not said so, and a father who has concerns. And the resolution requires talking to all 3 of them in a particular order and being the bridge that they can't quite build themselves. It is as simple as that. 2 people who want to be together and need someone to facilitate the small courage that is required to say so. The second is at Jukar's monument, the old battlefield in Whiterun Hold, where the ghost of a warrior named Ruki has been waiting for the ghost of her beloved Fenrig, who died in the battle, and whose spirit got confused in the way that spirits sometimes get confused and ended up nearby but not in the right place. You have to find Fenrig and bring him to Ruki, which involves talking and guiding rather than fighting, and then you watch 2 ghosts who have been separated by death and geography and confusion find each other in a field in the dark. And the reunion is quiet in the way that something that has been waited for a very long time often is. The third takes you to Markarth, the difficult city, and asks you to help a bard named Calselmo, who is in love with the innkeeper Feline, but has been unable to say so through a combination of scholarly awkwardness and probably spending too much time in Dwemer ruins. You write the letter that expresses what he can't quite say directly, and deliver it, and stand aside while 2 people who have circled each other for years finally arrive at the obvious. The reward is called Agent of Mara, a permanent 15% increase in magic resistance. It stacks with other bonuses. It's useful for any build. But it comes from having walked through 3 stories of people who wanted to love and couldn't quite get there alone, and having helped them. The Heart of Dibella tells a harder version of something similar. The goddess of love and beauty has a temple in Markarth, maintained by priestesses who conduct their rituals in private and who do not appreciate visitors entering the inner sanctum uninvited. If you do enter, if you pick the lock or steal the key, you'll find the priestesses in the middle of something significant. They are seeking a new Sibyl, a young girl prophesied to carry Dibella's presence in the world. The Sibyl has been found in a vision, but has also been taken. A girl named Fjotra, daughter of a man named Enmon in the village of Karthwasten, was taken by the Forsworn. She's in Broken Tower Redoubt, which is a Forsworn stronghold deep in the Reach. And getting her out requires moving through the entirety of a heavily defended position and dealing with a Forsworn Briarheart, which is the Forsworn's particular magic practice made flesh. A warrior who has had their heart literally removed and replaced with a Briarheart, granting them power at the cost of what that removal entails. Fjotra is a child. She is calm in captivity in the way that children who are very frightened sometimes present as calm, the stillness of someone who has decided that panic won't help and has opted for waiting instead. She walks back to Markarth with you through the Reach's difficult terrain without complaint. The temple receives her. Hamal, the high priestess, accepts her. The ceremony of welcome that happens is quiet and genuine, a community receiving someone it has been waiting for. You receive the blessing of Dibella, the agent of Dibella, 10% more physical damage against opponents of the opposite sex. Practical, but the texture of receiving it, of having spent time in Markarth's beautifully terrible canyon city on behalf of a goddess who asks for beauty and receives it in the form of a child being returned to safety. That texture is its own kind of thing. A Night to Remember is the counterpoint to all of this, being neither quiet nor gentle, but certainly memorable. It begins in any tavern after you've reached level 14, when a Breton named Sam Gaven challenges you to a drinking contest, and you, presumably because you have not yet learned that strangers in taverns who challenge you to drinking contests are worth being suspicious of, accept. You wake up somewhere else. You have been somewhere else before waking up here, possibly several somewhere elses. And the process of reconstructing what happened involves visiting a temple in Markarth that you apparently violated, a farm that you apparently promised to marry into, a goat that you apparently stole and sold and whose whereabouts need to be addressed, and a staff that you apparently promised to retrieve from a place called Morvunskar, which is a ruin full of angry mages. The trail of devastation is comprehensive. Each stop adds a new dimension of what your character apparently got up to during the lost hours of the previous evening, and none of it is exactly admirable, but all of it is deeply entertaining, in the way that the morning after a very bad decision is entertaining when you're not the one who made it. Sam Gaven, when you finally track him down at the end of the quest, reveals himself to be Sanguine, the Daedric prince of debauchery and revelry, and the kind of hedonism that treats social norms as entertainment rather than guidance. He's been having a wonderful time. He is, arguably, the most cheerful person you'll meet in Skyrim, genuinely delighted by the chaos he's facilitated, and entirely untroubled by the fact that it was at your expense. His reward is the Sanguine Rose, a staff that summons a leveled Dremora to fight for you for 60 seconds. The Dremora, being creatures of oblivion, bring with them a very particular combat style and an attitude toward enemies that is difficult to describe as anything other than enthusiastic. The rose is genuinely useful for any build that can use it, but the texture of how you received it, the long, humiliating morning after quest through Skyrim's hold capitals rebuilding the story of one terrible night, is what stays with you. Sanguine is not malevolent in the way most Daedric princes can be malevolent. He's celebratory. He believes in the value of experience over caution, of having stories to tell over having done the careful and sensible thing. There is something almost philosophically coherent about him, even if the philosophy and practice involves stolen goats and inappropriately promised marriages. The Unfathomable Depths quest is quieter than all of these, beginning with a simple request. An Argonian woman named From Deepest Fathoms is in the Riften docks, in considerable distress, and she will press something called a lexicon into your hands and beg you to return it to the Dwemer ruins of Avanchenzel. She's been having nightmares, visions. The lexicon is speaking to her, and she needs it gone, and she needs it gone now. The lexicon is a Dwemer device, a record keeper, and it has been haunting her ever since she participated in an expedition to Avanchenzel with 3 companions. The Dwemer device imprinted itself on her during the expedition and has been broadcasting Dwemer memories at her ever since, which is the specific horror of interacting with Dwemer technology without fully understanding it, that some of it is not passive, some of it remembers and transmits. The expedition didn't go well. As you move through Avanchenzel, returning the lexicon to its proper place, you'll see echoes of what happened to the other 3, the ghosts of their final hours playing out in the Dwemer architecture around you. They got deeper than they should have. They found things that responded to being found. They died in the ruins they'd come to study. Returning the lexicon to the lexicon receptacle at the end of the dungeon completes the quest. The reward, called Ancient Knowledge, permanently improves your smithing skill and grants an armor bonus when wearing Dwemer equipment. The lexicon imprints some portion of itself on you, the same way it imprinted on From Deepest Fathoms, but this time the imprint is of expertise rather than trauma. The Dwemer transferred knowledge directly. That's what the lexicon was built for. Not storage for retrieval later, but actual transmission, the shortcutting of decades of study through direct experience of the information itself. If that technology had survived intact and been understood and scaled, education in Tamriel would look very different. Instead, there are fragments of it scattered in ruins that are mostly sealed, and one woman in the Riften docks is finally sleeping soundly again. And the ancient knowledge is in your skill set, worn there as lightly as anything learned ever is. There are still more stories. There are always more stories. The Legend of Red Eagle, which begins with a book called Red Eagle's Right, and takes you into the heart of the Reach to find the sword of an ancient forsworn king who fought against Nordic conquest and fell, and whose spirit has been bound to the land ever since, waiting for someone to complete the ceremony that will free him or prove him. The quest ends in a word wall and a named enemy and a sense of scale, of a history of resistance that the official records buried, but that the land itself remembers. The Ansilvun dungeon quest, triggered by journals found in the ruin itself, about a man named Lua Alskaven who came to Ansilvun to raise her husband's spirit from the dead using ancient Nordic necromantic techniques, and who succeeded in a manner that was not quite what she had in mind, the dead husband not being cooperative about being raised for the purpose she intended, the whole operation going sideways in the way that grief-driven necromancy tends to. The quest at the old Hrolden Inn, where the ghost of a soldier from Tiber Septim's army manifests when you sleep in the same bed the Dragonborn Emperor once used, calling you by his companion's name, looking for a sword that was lost in the chaos of a campaign 3 centuries past. You find the sword, you give it to the ghost. He mistakes you for his lost comrade in the way that ghosts sometimes conflate the present with the past. You play along. It costs you nothing, and gives him a moment of peace that he wouldn't have otherwise. The coming-of-age quest, which begins when you follow a woman named Salma into a dungeon called Ironbind Barrow with her companion Beamja, and which reveals itself to be something more complicated than a standard dungeon delve when Beamja's real intentions become clear in the throne room at the end. Salma trusted him. That trust was misplaced. The aftermath of the encounter is quiet and carries the weight of someone learning something about the world that they would have preferred not to know. The Silenced Tongues quest in Vollenrude, where 2 dragon cult priests who were killed long ago still maintain a dynamic that is essentially fraternal, the sibling rivalry that survived their deaths and became something stranger in the long centuries of their undeath, and where the word wall at the end, and the echoes of the dragon cult's administrative past, make the place feel like a genuine fragment of history rather than just an obstacle course. These are the small stories, the ones that don't have their names on the main menu, that aren't part of the official guilds or the Great Wars. They are the stories that happen when someone in Bethesda's writing room said, "What if there's a man in the mountains who still worships the old gods? And what if you could help him keep that alive for one more generation? What if there's a ghost in a graveyard who just wants to play hide and seek because she's 8 years old and the only thing she knows how to do is play? What if there's a lighthouse keeper who kept the lamp burning even after everything was gone?" These are the stories Skyrim tells when nobody is asking it to. When you walk off the road and into the rough terrain and find a shack or a crypt or a farm where something has happened or is happening or will happen if you stay long enough to see it through. The road in Skyrim doesn't run out. That's the thing about it. You can walk in any direction and the world keeps going, keeps revealing itself in increments, keeps offering these small and specific stories at the ends of paths that don't appear on any map. The fire is lower now, the wind has settled. Outside, wherever outside is for you tonight, the world is doing whatever the world does at this hour, the ordinary work of time passing in its ordinary way. And inside this story, inside this particular telling of the quiet corners of a place that isn't real, but is somehow full of things that feel true, the road keeps going. The mountains of Skyrim are always there when you need them. The snow at the peak never melts. The gray beards are at the top, meditating, keeping the long silence that is their form of speaking. The fire at the inn is always warm. There is always a seat by it. Come back any time. If this helped you sleep, if it helped you get comfortable and let the weight of the day ease off a little, consider subscribing and leaving a comment about what you'd like to hear next. There are 1,000 more stories in these mountains. We've only just started. Sleep well, cozy nights. The road will be there when you wake up. Part 11. Waking Nightmare. The priest who came back. There is a tower on a clifftop above Dawnstar. It watches over the Hold Capital the way old watchtowers watch over things, with the particular attention of structures that have outlasted the purpose they were built for, and have been repurposed and abandoned and repurposed again in the way that useful elevated stones tend to be. From the inn in Dawnstar, if you look up, you can see it against the sky. Most people don't look up. They're too tired. The people of Dawnstar are exhausted. That's the first thing you hear when you arrive. The conversation bleeding out from the inn and into the cold harbor air, the specific complaint of people who haven't been sleeping well for long enough that it has moved from inconvenience into something that feels like threat. The miners who work the iron and quicksilver mines look hollowed. The Jarl is short-tempered in a way that suggests he would prefer not to be. The guards are tired in the particular way that guards get tired when they haven't been sleeping, which is not the productive tiredness of hard work, but the grinding tiredness of nights spent fighting something that can't be fought because it isn't there when you're awake. Nightmares. The whole town is having them. Every night, the same quality of darkness in the sleeping hours, and no one can say what exactly they dream, because dreams are slippery, and what remains in the morning is mostly the feeling rather than the images, the feeling of being consumed, of something taking something from you that you can't quite name. A priest of Mara named Arandur is in the Wind Peak Inn. He is doing his best. He moves through the room speaking quietly to the miners and guards, not promising anything he can't deliver, just being present in the way that a priest's presence can sometimes ease a room, even when the priest has no solutions available. He's a gentleman, worn down in a different way from the rest of the town, worn down by knowing something and not being sure how to act on it. He knows where the nightmares are coming from. The tower on the cliff is called Nightcaller Temple. It was a military fort before it was anything else, abandoned, then occupied by devotees of Vermina. Vermina is the Daedric prince of dreams and nightmares, of fate, of the skull of corruption, and her relationship with Dawnstar is not a benevolent one. The devotees brought an artifact into the temple called the Skull of Corruption. The skull is not a subtle thing. It feeds on dreams, on memories, pulling them into itself. And the people near it dream the things the skull has consumed, cycling through memories that aren't theirs, experiencing the psychological residue of everyone else's nightmares in addition to their own. Years before the events of Skyrim, a band of orcs who had been driven half-mad by the nightmares the skull was generating took it upon themselves to enter the temple and destroy the source. The devotees, outnumbered and outmatched in direct combat, used an emergency measure. They released the miasma, a gas they had developed over years of study, which has the property of preserving whatever it contacts in a state of suspended animation, slowing life processes down to near nothing. The miasma put everyone in the temple to sleep. The orcs, the devotees, everyone. The temple sealed itself around its sleeping occupants like an insect preserved in amber, and the years went by outside, while inside nothing moved. The miasma is weakening. That's what Arandur believes. That's why the nightmares have gotten worse recently. The seal on the temple eroding. The skull's influence beginning to bleed through the walls again after years of relative quiet. The people of Dawnstar are dreaming the skull's contents, and it will get worse until either the miasma fully fails and the sleepers wake, or someone goes in and ends it. Arandur wants to destroy the skull. This requires knowing something about Arandur that he will reveal only when you are already inside the temple, in the specific way that people reveal important things about themselves when the moment makes concealment impossible. He was one of the devotees. He served Vermina in that temple before the orcs came. His name then was Brother Casimir, and when the orc raid happened and the miasma was deployed, he ran. He got out before the gas reached him. He left his brothers and sisters sleeping in the amber of the temple, and he spent the years since becoming someone else, a priest of Mara, a man dedicated to the opposite of what Vermina represents. Love rather than consuming darkness, presence rather than dream theft. He came back to Dawnstar because the nightmares started, and he knew what they meant, and he felt, with the specific weight of guilt that has been carried for a long time, that this was his responsibility to face. The dream stride is the mechanism that lets you navigate the temple past a barrier you cannot otherwise cross. It involves drinking a potion called Vermina's Torpor, which sends you into a dream state version of the temple, seeing it through the eyes of Brother Casimir, Arandur's former self, on the night of the orc raid. You are inside his memory. You move through the frantic minutes before the miasma deployment, watching his choices from the inside, and the chain you need to pull to release the miasma and disperse the barrier is right there, in the past, available because the past of a dream is as real as its present. When you pull the chain and return to the waking world, the barrier falls and the way to the skull of corruption opens. Two former devotees are waiting, Varen and Thoric, people Arandur knew and left, who have survived the miasma decades better than they should have, and who have views about Arandur's plan to destroy what they have spent their lives serving. They are not in a persuadable state. The confrontation is what it is, which is two people who have defined themselves around an artifact defending it against someone who has defined himself around undoing what that artifact does. At the very end, when the skull of corruption is within reach and Arandur is performing the ritual to destroy it, Vermina speaks to you directly. She's been watching the whole time, of course. She's a Daedric prince. What she offers is simple. Kill Arandor before he finishes the ritual. Take the skull for yourself. The skull is a powerful staff. It absorbs dream essence and releases it as a damaging attack. If you take it, the nightmares in Dawnstar continue. The people in the inn keep dreaming things that aren't theirs. But you have the artifact. If you let Arandor finish, the skull is destroyed. The nightmares stop. And Arandor is still there, standing in the silence of a completed thing, a man who came back and did what he came back to do. He offers to travel with you afterward, to be your companion. He carries with him the particular quality of someone who has done penance through action rather than just intention, who has stood in the place where he failed the first time and made different choices, and who understands that he will spend the rest of his life being Brother Arandor rather than Brother Casimir, not because the past is gone, but because what you do with the past is the thing that matters. That night, and every night after, the people of Dawnstar will sleep without dreaming things that aren't theirs. The Jarl will be less short-tempered. The miners will go down into the mines having actually rested. The tower on the cliff is just a tower now, empty. The amber of the miasma finally dissolved, its occupants dealt with, the artifact that made the whole place into a nightmare machine gone. The cold harbor air comes in off the sea. The hold capital goes about its business. Somewhere in the inn, someone laughs at something, and it's the laugh of a person who slept well the night before. Part 12. Missing in action. The old woman by the market stall. There is a woman in Whiterun's market who sells jewelry. She is old, with the particular economy of movement that comes from a lifetime of outdoor work in cold weather, and she keeps her stall with the quiet attention of someone who has been doing this long enough that the motions are automatic, freeing the rest of her mind to work on something else. Her name is Fralia Greymane, and the something else her mind is working on is her son. Thorald is missing, has been missing for months. The story that the other family in this particular feud, the Battleborns, tells with practiced convenience is that Thorald made his choices, chose his side in the Civil War, and paid the price that people pay when they make those choices. The subtext being that he's dead, and the family should accept it and stop asking inconvenient questions. The two clans, the Greymanes and the Battleborns, have been divided by the Civil War in the way that Whiterun itself is divided. The same city trying to contain two incompatible allegiances in the same space. The Greymanes are Stormcloak sympathizers. The Battleborns back the Empire. It's the kind of division that has been poisoning Whiterun's social fabric in small ways for years. And Thorald is the most visible casualty of it. Fralia is not accepting it. She says, at her market stall, sometimes with an edge of desperation, that she feels in her heart that her son is alive. Mothers' feelings of this kind are not scientifically defensible, but they are also not always wrong, and in this case, she's right. The feeling and the fact align. Following her home, listening to what she has to say in private, leads you to her other son, Avulstein, who is hiding in the family's house because he is himself a Stormcloak. And Whiterun is currently a complicated place for Stormcloaks, and visible association with the family of a disappeared rebel is worse. He's young and frightened and furious in the particular combination that describes young men whose fear has been redirected into aggression because fury is easier to inhabit than terror. He knows his brother is alive. He doesn't know where. The evidence is hidden in the Battleborn household. The clan with Imperial connections knows exactly what happened to Thorald, knows because they helped it happen, or know the people who did, and the document that confirms what Avulstein suspects is somewhere in that house. Getting to it requires either picking a lock or passing a speech check with one of the Battleborns, who has just enough conscience left to feel bad about what he knows. What the document confirms is this. Thorald was captured, fighting alongside Stormcloak forces, handed over to the Imperial Legion, and then the Thalmor took him from the Legion. He's in Northwatch Keep. Northwatch Keep is on the very northern tip of Hoffingar Hold, on the coast near the Sea of Ghosts. And it is a place where the Thalmor take people they want to question at length about things the Thalmor consider important. People do not often leave Northwatch Keep. The Thalmor don't have Thorald because he's a significant Stormcloak commander. He's a young man who fought in a battle and survived long enough to be captured and transferred. They have him because the Thalmor have an interest in the Civil War generally, in understanding its dynamics, in knowing which families are producing which fighters, in accumulating the kind of granular intelligence about Skyrim's internal politics that makes managing a long-term strategic relationship with a province easier. To Thorald, sitting in a cell in Northwatch Keep, chained to a wall and being interrogated by someone whose job title is Northwatch Interrogator, this geopolitical framing is probably not his primary concern. Northwatch Keep does not welcome visitors. The Thalmor soldiers who guard it are not the kind of soldiers who respond well to creative diplomacy. The game's speech checks against them, hitting hard limits in a way that makes clear that the Keep's architecture of secrecy depends on there being no one who can talk their way in. You go through or you don't go at all. The Keep is cold and unlovely, designed as a military structure rather than a place anyone was expected to want to spend time in, and the Thalmor's occupation of it has not made it more inviting. Moving through it toward the back, where the cells are, requires working through a complement of Thalmor agents who are well-equipped and who fight with the aggressive efficiency of a force that does not expect to lose engagements in its own building. Thorald is chained to the wall in the deepest cell. He is exactly what a person looks like after extended time in Thalmor custody, which is to say he is alive and present but not the same as he was before. He looks at you with the eyes of someone trying to determine if this is real, or another thing the people who held him here have done to him. When he determines that it's real, something in his expression doesn't relax exactly, but reorganizes itself around a new immediate priority, which is leaving. He takes a weapon from a nearby surface and follows you out. The exit requires fighting the guards you didn't already dispatch on the way in, and Thorald contributes to this with the energy of someone who has been saving it up. When you emerge into the northern air, and the sea of ghosts is there, and the world is just the world again rather than a stone cell and its attendant horrors, he stops and breathes. He won't go back to Whiterun. He knows that returning to his family in the city would only direct the Thalmor's attention to them, and his family has already paid more than enough. He'll find the nearest Stormcloak camp and rejoin the fight. It's what he knows how to do. He asks you to carry a message to his mother, and he turns and walks north. The message you carry back to Fralia is not an ending. It's a continuation, a different kind of worry, rather than the relief of resolution. Her son is alive. Her son is heading toward more fighting. Her son made his choices and will keep making them. And she will keep running her market stall and feeling his absence and selling her jewelry and waiting for news that will arrive or not arrive with the randomness that news from wars tends to arrive with. She receives the message with the particular grace of a mother who has been practicing how to receive difficult news for months. It hurts. She was hoping for more, but she says thank you, and she means it. And the ring she gives you for payment is one of the Greymane family's pieces, carefully made. The two families are still at their respective stalls in Whiterun's market when you walk back through. The old familiar division, the same city holding two incompatible allegiances. Thorald is somewhere north, probably cold, probably moving fast. He's alive, and that's the thing that was in question, and now it isn't. His mother sells jewelry. She keeps her stall with the quiet attention of someone who has been doing this long enough that the motions are automatic. Part 13. The White Phial and the Promise to a Dying Man. Windhelm in the winter, which is to say Windhelm always, is a city built from the architecture of its own stubbornness. The stone is dark, and the snow is constant, and the wind that comes down from the mountains carries with it the specific bite of cold that doesn't want to be metabolized into the body's warmth, but wants to remain itself, cold for its own sake. The city resists this wind with its mass, its walls, its sheer vertical presence against the gray sky, and this negotiation has been going on so long that it looks less like a city surviving the weather, and more like the weather and the city have agreed to coexist in their mutual hostility. An alchemist named Norelion lives in a shop in Windhelm. He is dying. This is not a metaphor or a narrative device. He is genuinely ill, the kind of ill that moves in only one direction, and he has been this way for long enough that he and his young assistant Quintus have developed around it the routines that people develop around permanent difficult facts. The shop is called the White Phial. The phial is a thing he has spent his life pursuing. Norelion is a scholar in the specific way that alchemy produces scholars, people who have devoted their cognitive lives to the intersection of natural philosophy and practical chemistry, to the understanding of what things are made of, and what happens when you combine them. He found, in ancient records, references to a white phial, a vessel created in the Merethic era from stone drawn from the throat of the world, Skyrim's highest peak, the place where magic runs through the rock in concentrations that make ordinary stone glow faintly in darkness. The white phial could fill itself with any alchemical solution, replenishing it indefinitely. One perfect vessel, one perfect potion, forever. He found where it was. He sent letters to Quintus about the location, about Forsaken Cave, northwest of Windhelm, in the mountains. He was going to retrieve it, and it was going to be the crowning achievement of his life's work, the thing that justified everything, the discovery that he had aimed at for decades. And then he got sick. And Forsaken Cave is in the mountains, in the part of the terrain that the Pale and Eastmarch share, and it is not a place that a dying old alchemist can navigate safely. The cave is a legitimate challenge. It's inhabited, among other things, by a spirit called the Pale Lady, or at least a specific wraith form, and by the usual complement of undead that Skyrim buries in its Nordic tombs like a compulsion the entire province can't shake. Moving through it toward the phial requires actual effort and actual risk, the kind of risk that Norelion knew he was asking you to take when he sent you on the errand. The white phial, when you find it, is cracked. It's been cracked for a long time, the original damage predating Norelion's research by centuries. And the thing that makes a vessel able to replenish an alchemical solution indefinitely also makes it very specific about what counts as a solution, and with a crack in it, the replenishment doesn't function. You bring back a beautiful broken thing and give it to a dying old man who stares at it with the expression of someone who has just discovered that the word they've been saying to themselves for decades has been heard but misunderstood. He takes it. He's not unkind about it. He understands it isn't your failure. He holds the phial, and he doesn't say much, and Quintus watches him hold it with the face of someone watching a person he loves absorb something painful. Norelion dies not long after. He leaves the shop to Quintus, who inherits both the business and the specific burden of this particular unfinished story. But there's more. Quintus approaches you, when the loss has settled enough that practical thinking is possible again, with information. He has found in Norelion's notes references to 3 specific components that might be used to repair the crack in the phial: unmelting snow from the throat of the world, the breath of a dragon, the dust of a giant's club. These are not things you find on market shelves. The unmelting snow from the throat of the world is exactly what it sounds like. Snow from the summit of Skyrim's highest peak, which maintains its form and temperature regardless of conditions because the magical residue of ancient and significant events has altered its properties permanently. Getting it requires going to the top of the world. The throat of the world, at its peak, is where the Greybeards live and where the ancient ceremony that banished Alduin into the time stream left its permanent mark. The snow up there is not ordinary snow. Dragon's breath is obtained through the kind of encounter that is not gentle. A dragon's breath, the substance of a shout in physical form, can be condensed if you have the right receptacle and the right circumstances, and the right circumstances involve a dragon being fairly close and fairly engaged in the act of breathing before you can gather what you need. This is, shall we say, a proximity-dependent activity. The dust of a giant's club means going to where giants are and breaking one of their clubs, which requires a particular approach because giants, as the transcript notes, are semi-nomadic herders who don't attack unless threatened, and breaking one of their clubs does constitute threatening them in a fairly direct way. When you bring these 3 components to Quintus and he repairs the phial, the result is something that works. The repaired white phial fills with whatever alchemical solution you want and replenishes it indefinitely, a single perfect vessel carrying a single chosen potion forever. It's one of the more genuinely useful artifacts in the game for certain playstyles, particularly those that rely heavily on potions. But what it represents, what the whole long chain of that quest represents, from a dying man's deathbed hope to a broken discovery to a young assistant who loved his mentor enough to keep working on the problem after the mentor was gone, is something more specific than utility. It's the story of an incomplete life's work being completed by someone else, the research and the passion and the years of work of one person being picked up and carried forward by another. Norelion never got to use the white phial. He never got to see it work the way he imagined it working. Quintus did that work for him, and in doing so made the thing that Norelion aimed at real in a world where Norelion was no longer present to see it. That particular form of completion, of one person finishing what another started, is its own kind of continuity. It doesn't require the original person to witness it, the thing becomes real regardless. The wind comes down from the mountains. Windhelm's dark stones hold against it. In a shop that's now Quintus's, a repaired white file sits on a shelf and fills itself with the patience of something that has been waiting a very long time to do exactly this. Part 14. The Legend of Red Eagle, the King Who Would Not Yield. There is a book called Red Eagle's Right in a Forsworn Camp Deep in the Reach, and if you take it and read it, you will find the story of a king. Not a king in the way that Skyrim uses the word now, with its jarls and its high king and its political machinery. A king in the older way, the way the word was used before it became an administrative title, meaning someone who holds the land in trust and the land holds them in return. The relationship between person and place being reciprocal and sacred. His name was Red Eagle. He was a king of the Reach, from a time so long ago that the era doesn't have a common name, just a rough position in the sliding scale of Nordic history that places it somewhere in the First Era's first century. The Nords who were then pushing into the Reach from the east and north were not yet the Nordic civilization of Skyrim that subsequent centuries would build. They were something earlier and less organized, a force of expansion rather than a state, and their expansion was not kind to the people already in the Reach. Red Eagle fought them. For years, he fought them. He was not fighting from a position of strategic strength. The Reach's population was smaller and less organized militarily than the expanding Nordic forces. He understood this, and the understanding didn't change his approach. He fought because the land was the land's people, and the people's history was in the land, and there was no version of accepting the loss that didn't involve accepting the erasure of something that had no other copy. He made a deal, eventually, that legends frame as the kind of deal you make when you have run out of ordinary options, and the extraordinary ones are the only things left. A Daedric entity, possibly Hagraven connected, offered power in exchange for something. What the book calls his soul, what more skeptical readings call his humanity, the deal produced an empowered king who could fight on past the point where the physical body should have given out, who could sustain the war longer than the war should have lasted. He fought longer. He carved the resistance out of years rather than months. The cost, in the way that such costs manifest, was visible to the people around him, even if he couldn't see it in himself. He became something that was sustained by the power he'd accepted, rather than by the ordinary processes of a living man. He was still fighting, he was still Red Eagle, but he was also something that had paid a price that the payment kept collecting. The Nords won anyway. They won slowly, and they won at cost, and they won in a way that Red Eagle made as expensive as possible, but the historical arc bent toward them. He was killed in the final battle, a location the texts call Sundered Towers, and he did not die easily. His sword was buried with him. The tomb is in the Reach, in the high country where the terrain keeps its secrets in the specific way that terrain shaped by thousands of years of conflict keeps secrets, worn into its own concealment. The Red Eagle Redoubt connects to the Sundered Towers through a path that requires fighting through Forsworn, the spiritual descendants of the Reachmen Red Eagle fought for, who maintain the site with the reverence of people honoring a predecessor. They're not wrong to do so. Red Eagle is the first and most complete version of everything the Forsworn Rebellion is. The idea that the Reach is a people's place and that the people will fight for it past the point where the fighting makes strategic sense. His spirit is still there. His sword is there, the Red Eagle's fury, and when you take it from the burial chamber and return to his tomb, his barrow, the spirit rises for the final confrontation. He is not the kind of opponent you can negotiate with. The deal he made took from him the capacity for that kind of flexibility. He fights because that's what he is now, the residue of a king who refused to stop fighting, and the only way to complete the ceremony that the book described is to defeat him. Red Eagle's Bane replaces the Fury when he falls. It's an enchanted version of the same weapon, burning and more powerful, and the word wall behind his burial place carries the second word of the dismaying shout. The rewards are real and practical, but the story, the thing that you carry away with the sword, is the image of someone who loved a place so specifically and so completely that they traded their own continuation for the possibility of its survival. He didn't win. The Reach was taken. The Reachmen became the Forsworn, and the Forsworn became a resistance movement that has been conducting guerrilla warfare in the hills for 1,000 years. None of that is victory in the conventional sense. But there is a burial place in the high country of the Reach, where the Forsworn still tend to things, still maintain the camp around the tomb, still tell the story. And the story is not the story of someone who was beaten. It's the story of someone who fought until there was nothing left to fight with and then kept going anyway. And that particular quality of stubbornness is honored by the people who came from the same tradition, the same attachment to place, the same refusal to make the arithmetic of survival into the whole of their ambition. Red Eagle's tomb breathes the cold mountain air. The Reach is still itself, still its own strange and difficult territory, still full of the memory of all the things that happened there. The sword is heavy. All the best ones are. Part 15. Rise in the East. Pirates, the Sea of Ghosts, and What the Docks Know. Windhelm's docks are not technically in Windhelm. They are outside the city walls, extending out over the frigid water of the river Yorgrim before it meets the sea, in that buffer zone between the city's protection and the open roads dangers that most cities have, and that Windhelm is particularly attentive to, given its long-standing practice of keeping non-Nordic residents in specifically delineated areas. The Argonians who are forbidden entry into the city proper live on these docks, in conditions that are not warm or comfortable, performing the dock work that keeps Windhelm's trade viable, while being excluded from the city that benefits from that work. The East Empire Company has an office on these docks. The East Empire Company is the Empire's great mercantile enterprise, the trading organization that moves goods across Tamriel under Imperial Charter, and in Skyrim its operation is a reduced version of what it is elsewhere, the Civil War and general instability having complicated the logistics considerably. The man running the Windhelm office is named Orthus Indario, and he has a problem: pirates. The Bloodhorkers specifically, a group operating out of the islands in the Sea of Ghosts, who have been systematically targeting East Empire Company shipping in the region. Attacks, theft, sinkings. The financial damage is ongoing, and the problem hasn't resolved itself, which problems involving organized piracy rarely do without direct intervention. Orthus has a theory, which is that the Bloodhorkers are not operating independently. Someone in Windhelm is feeding them information about cargo manifests and shipping schedules, which would explain the specific efficiency of the attacks. Pirates generally don't have good intelligence about commercial shipping unless someone is providing it to them, and the quality of targeting in the Bloodhorker attacks suggests someone in a position to know things. That someone, if Orthus's theory is right, is connected to a prominent Windhelm family. The clan Shattershield, one of the city's influential merchant families, is under suspicion. The connection, if it exists, would be as much about political rivalry and the economics of removing a competitor's ships from the sea as about the piracy itself. Following this thread leads to Japhet's Folly, which is a rocky outcropping in the Sea of Ghosts north of Winterhold that has been occupied by the Bloodhorkers as their base of operations. Getting there requires a ship, specifically the ship that Orthus can arrange, and Japhet's Folly itself is not a comfortable destination, being a sea-beaten rock with a small fortification and a population of pirates who were not expecting company. The leader of the Bloodhorkers is a man named Halden, who is not just a pirate but a battle mage, which is a combination that makes the final confrontation considerably more difficult than ordinary piracy suppression work. He commands the sea from that rocky position, and he has been doing so effectively for long enough that he's comfortable in it. After Haldanes and his crew are dealt with, after the papers and evidence that confirm the intelligence connection are secured, the return to Windhelm and the delivery of this information to Orthus and the relevant authorities represents the formal end of the Bloodhorker problem. The Shattershield connection, if substantiated, complicates the city's politics in ways that the Jarl will have to navigate. The docks are quieter after this. The Argonian workers load and unload cargo in the gray morning light, without the specific overhead tension of wondering whether this particular shipment will make it to its destination. The sea is still cold and still itself, still the Sea of Ghosts, the name suggesting something of its temperament. Orthus is grateful in the way that people who handle difficult problems professionally and with significant personal investment are grateful when those problems resolve. He paid you. He's back to the work of running a trade office in a hold capital that is not, by any objective measure, ideal for commerce. The pirates are gone. The docks are functional. Outside Windhelm's walls, in the cold and the dark and the necessary distance from the city's official warmth, the people who keep the city's economy moving continue their work. Part 16. The Mind of Madness, a tea party at the end of sanity. There is a man walking circles in solitude. His name is Dervanin, and he is, by the visual evidence, not entirely connected to the same reality as the people around him. He walks in circles near the Bard's College, and he speaks in the cadence of someone whose internal processing has lost its relationship to the external world's sense of normal. He talks about his master. He needs help finding his master. His master has been gone for a very long time, and Dervanin misses him very much, and would you please help? His master is Sheogorath, the Daedric Prince of Madness. The way into the quest that follows requires acquiring the Pelagius hip bone from the Blue Palace's storeroom, which is already the kind of object that announces the register of everything that is about to happen. A hip bone from a specific historical figure in a storeroom. The Pelagius in question is Pelagius the Mad, a former emperor of Tamriel so spectacularly unstable that historical accounts of his reign read like creative fiction even when they're presented as straightforward chronicle. He died in the Blue Palace, apparently, or at least parts of him are still there. The hip bone is the key to a particular wing of the Blue Palace that has been sealed for a very long time. When you use it, the door opens onto something that is not the wing of a palace, but a tea party in a landscape that should not exist. A psychedelic interior space that operates according to Sheogorath's understanding of spatial relationships, which is creative and non-Euclidean and full of tables. Sheogorath is there. He is having tea. He is thoroughly delighted to see you. The quest that follows inside Pelagius's mind, because that is where you are, inside the mental landscape of a dead, mad emperor, requires solving three problems that exist as psychological architecture. Pelagius's paranoia, his night terrors, his anger, have been given spatial form by the prince's presence here, and they need to be resolved not through combat exactly, but through the application of the Wabajak, Sheogorath's artifact, which transforms things randomly and unpredictably into other things, which is its nature and the nature of its creator. The Wabajak is perhaps the most honest Daedric artifact in the game, in terms of what it reveals about its patron. Every other Daedric artifact carries an agenda, a specific purpose that reflects the prince's nature in a directed way. The Wabajak carries Sheogorath's nature in the most accurate possible form, which is that his nature is anti-direction, that unpredictability is not a side effect of what he values but the thing itself. The staff can do essentially anything. It turns enemies into sweet rolls and Dremora and piles of gold and random animals and back again. There is no formula. There is no prediction. There is just the pressing of the button and the willingness to accept whatever comes out. Within Pelagius's mind, the Wabajak is precisely calibrated to the problems you're solving, not because it's been modified, but because the mind it's operating in shapes what it does. The paranoia, the nightmare, the rage, each of these respond to specific applications of creative and deliberately chaotic intervention in a way that a sword never could, because what they need is not destruction, but transformation, the particular violence of forcing something to be other than what it is. Sheogorath, when the work is done, sends you back to solitude with the Wabajak as your reward. He is, in that moment, in the best mood possible, which is to say his mood is difficult to categorize because moods require a stable platform to operate from, and Sheogorath's platform is built on a foundation of glorious instability. Dervanin, when you return to him in the street outside the Bard's College, gets his master back. Whatever Dervanin's relationship to Sheogorath is, whatever it means to be the attendant of a Daedric prince who has been spending an indeterminate amount of time in a dead emperor's mental landscape, the reunion carries with it the particular relief of a person who has been worrying for a long time being released from the worrying. He was walking circles. He's still walking circles. But now his master is back and the circles have a different quality. The Wabajak stays with you. It continues to do whatever it does, which is to say it remains fundamentally true to the entity that made it. In a game full of weapons and artifacts that have purposes and directions and predictable outcomes, there is something genuinely freeing about having one that simply does not. Every time you use it, the world becomes temporarily and delightfully uncertain. That's the gift, if you can call it that. A tool for making certainty optional. Part 17. Answers in Stone. The smaller stories the world tells, the longer you walk. Skyrim's roads, the more you notice the places that aren't marked on any map. Not the grand ruins and the Questline dungeons and the hold capitals with their layered histories, but the smaller things, the single graves on hillsides with flowers placed fresh on them by someone still living. The campfire with a journal beside it, and a story in the journal that starts in one place and ends in a different place, and the person who wrote it is no longer present. The house that's been abandoned for reasons the architecture doesn't explain. These are not quests in the formal sense. They don't add markers to your journal, but they constitute a kind of narration that the game offers to people who are willing to slow down and read the world as text rather than terrain. Near the throat of the world, on the path up toward the monastery, there is a dead adventurer with a journal that describes the trip up the mountain in progressively more desperate terms. Someone started that climb with ambition and ended it with the specific clarity that comes when you understand that the gap between what you aimed for and what you were able to do has closed in the wrong direction. The journal ends. The body is still there in the cold. The mountain doesn't comment. There are word walls distributed across Skyrim in places that map, roughly, to the battles of the Dragon War, the ancient conflict between humans and dragons that ended with the dragons sealed in burial mounds and Alduin displaced into the time stream. Each wall marks a location where something significant happened, where the conflict came to a point, where someone carved words into stone because those words were worth the effort of carving them. Millennia have passed. The battle sites are now just places in the landscape, the mountains and forests and plains, having grown back over the violence the way living things grow back over everything eventually. The walls remain, the words in the dragon's tongue that only the Dragonborn can absorb as living knowledges rather than dead inscription. The Dragonborn reads the words and they become part of the voice, part of the expanding repertoire of what the shout is capable of. But each wall is also a monument, a marker for an event so old it has dissolved back into the terrain, visible only through the effort that someone made thousands of years ago to record it in a medium that would last. Near Iverstead, which is itself a town that exists in the specific quiet of places that serve a function that no one is quite sure is still relevant, the path up to the Greybeard's monastery begins. The 7,000 steps, the phrase used by the devout, though the actual number and whether any individual has counted them are both somewhat uncertain. Along the path there are word wall engravings that tell the story of Jürgen Windcaller's philosophy, the founding of the Way of the Voice, the interpretation of defeat that became the basis for a different relationship with the Thu'um. These inscriptions are not quests, they're context, the written record of a philosophical transformation that shaped Skyrim's relationship with its most distinctive power. Reading them on the way up the mountain, if you're moving through rather than fast traveling, gives the walk a texture that the fast travel route strips out. The mountain is significant not just as a high place, but as the location where a philosophy crystallized in response to catastrophe, where someone sat with defeat long enough to find something useful in it. The throat of the world, at the top, with its magical snow and its time wound, and its view of everything in every direction, is what it is partly because of what happened there, and partly because of what the Greybeards have done with what happened there. They turned a place of cosmic violence into a place of patient attention. They made a war site into a monastery. They did this slowly, over centuries, through practice rather than declaration. That transformation, from what a place was to what it became, is a story that Skyrim tells through its physical landscape, repeatedly and quietly. The Reach with its Dwemer ruins and its forsworn camps and its pre-Nordic sites, visible under the Nordic construction, visible under the Imperial influence. Black Reach with its vampire history and its Dwemer engineering and its Falmer occupation, layered one on top of the other. Windhelm, with Ysgramr's original hall and the Nordic supremacy that grew out of that foundation and the suffering that Nordic supremacy has produced in the people living under it. Everything is built on something. The question of what it was before is always answerable if you look carefully enough. The small quests, the ones that live in single dungeons and single conversations and single journals, are the places where the looking is most direct. You encounter one specific consequence of one specific decision made by one specific person at one specific moment, and the encounter is intimate in a way that the grand questlines, with their scope and their stakes, cannot always achieve. A lighthouse keeper kept the lamp burning. A woman in a cemetery wants to play hide and seek. An old man in a mountain shack kept an old god's name alive. A ghost in a Dwemer ruin wants to prove that her work was hers before she lets herself fade. These are not small stories because they happen to small people. They are small stories because they are specific enough to be seen whole, to be held in the hands like an object rather than stood before like a landscape. They have the particularity of things that are true in the exact form in which they present themselves, rather than as representations of something larger. Skyrim is full of them. They don't announce themselves. They wait by the road, in the wrong-looking farmhouse, in the odd behavior of an NPC who keeps walking a specific path. They wait for someone to slow down and ask what is happening here, to sit with the question long enough for the answer to emerge from the details. The fire in the inn is always warm. The mountains are always outside. The snow at the peak of the throat of the world never melts. There are 1,000 more stories in this province. 1,000 more graves with flowers on them. 1,000 more journals at the end of expeditions that didn't go as planned. 1,000 more small monuments to the specific ways that specific people tried to do something and either succeeded or didn't, and left the evidence behind them in the world. We've walked through some of them tonight. The ghost who wanted to sleep. The lighthouse keeper who kept the light. The old hunter who kept the god's name. The woman whose research was stolen and who spent her death trying to prove it was real. The priest who came back to finish what he should have stayed to handle the first time. These are the people of Skyrim in the truest sense, not the Jarls and the High Kings, and the Daedric princes and the dragons. The people who made their choices and lived with them, and sometimes didn't survive them, but left the evidence of having made them in the world, in stone, and in words, and in the specific quality of silence that haunts the places they pass through. The road is still there. It keeps going. It always does. Part 18. One last fire. The road underneath everything. There is a thing that happens in Skyrim when you have been walking for a long time. Not fast traveling, not teleporting from marker to marker on the map, but actually walking, following the roads, and then following the paths that branch off the roads, and then following the animal trails that branch off the paths, until you find yourself somewhere that no quest marker has ever pointed you, somewhere that exists simply because Bethesda built it, and you walk to it. In those places, the world has a quality that the well-traveled areas don't quite have. It's harder to describe than to experience. Something about the silence being specifically uninhabited rather than just quiet. Something about the landscape not having been shaped by player traffic the way the road from Whiterun to Riverwood has been shaped by it, worn smooth in the specific way that things get worn smooth by constant use. In these unmarked corners, you find the things that have no reason to be found. A single tree struck by lightning and still smoldering in the way that trees sometimes smolder for days after a strike, the wood taking its time and becoming ash. A pond too small to have a name, with the kind of clarity that deep cold water has, where the bottom is visible, and the reeds at the edge are the only architectural element, and a single heron stands at the water's margin, doing the heron's work of perfect patient stillness. A cairn, a stack of flat stones, deliberate, the kind of arrangement that means someone was here and wanted to leave evidence of it, the most fundamental possible monument, the one that requires only the landscape's own material and a few minutes of work. No inscription, no indication of who built it or why or when, just the record of a presence, the quiet declaration that something living passed through this particular piece of the world and noticed it and wanted to mark the noticing. These are the things that Skyrim contains past the edges of its narrative structure. The world doesn't stop at the last named location. It continues in the direction of the horizon in every direction, rendered at lower resolution, but still present, still there, still offering the horizon as a direction to travel. The questlines we've walked through tonight, the stories we've spent these hours inside, exist at the intersection of the designed and the discovered. Someone wrote them. Someone put Froki in his mountain shack and gave him the sacred trials to offer. Someone put Helgi's ghost in the cemetery at Morthal and gave her the voice of a child asking to play hide and seek. Someone put the Pale Lady in the underground forest and gave her the quality of grief that doesn't announce itself but simply is. These writers and designers made choices about what Skyrim should feel like when you walked through it alone. They made choices about the density of story per square mile of terrain, about the ratio of combat to conversation, about how much of the world's history should be accessible to someone willing to look for it. And what they built is a province that is legible, that can be read as text if you bring the patience to do the reading, the patience to wait until dark in a cemetery, the patience to follow a mountain road to a shack that isn't on the map, the patience to enter a lighthouse and stand still in the central room and look at the cup on the table and the book on the shelf and the absence where the family should be and understand from those details what happened here. That patience, the willingness to be present in a place long enough to receive what it's offering, is the skill that the small stories require and reward. They don't chase you down, they wait. They have been waiting for as long as the game has been running, for every player who fast-traveled past the lighthouse, and every player who entered Dawnstar without going to the inn, and every player who never walked south of the Pale's main road. And they'll keep waiting, in the specific faithful way that good stories wait, for anyone who slows down and stays long enough. We've been slow tonight, that was the point. The slow pace, the lingering in each story, the willingness to follow the full arc rather than just the beginning and the end. These are the conditions under which Skyrim gives you the most of itself. The province is generous with slow travelers. It has been since 2011, and it will be as long as anyone is playing it. There are people playing it tonight, right now, somewhere in the world, who have just found the white file and are carrying it back to a dying old man who doesn't know yet that it's cracked. There are people who have just walked into Frostmere Crypt for the first time and are feeling the temperature change and don't yet know about the underground forest. There are people who are standing in the Bannered Mare looking at Sadia and trying to figure out if the fear in her eyes is the fear of someone guilty running from justice or the fear of someone innocent running from power, and they won't know which when they make their choice, and they'll carry the uncertainty with them afterward. All of them are having the experience of being in a story that is patient with them, that doesn't judge them for their choices, that lets them choose and then shows them what the world looks like afterward. That's what these games do at their best. And this one, for all its years and all its reissues and all its ports, still has those small, specific stories in the corners, still waits for slow travelers. And that is where we'll leave the fire tonight, low and warm and good. If you've been somewhere quiet with this, somewhere comfortable, I hope this helped you get there and stay there. The mountains of Skyrim have a way of being just cold enough to make warmth feel like something you've earned rather than something you take for granted. That's the best way to be warm, really. When you notice it, drop a comment below and tell me where you are in the world right now and what time it is. There's something about knowing that these stories are reaching people in different places at different hours that feels exactly right for this kind of content. And if you want more roads like this one, more slow walks through the quieter corners of Skyrim and the stories that live in them, subscribe, and you'll know when the next one is ready. There is no shortage of stories. There never has been. Sleep well, cozy nights. The lamp is still burning. The snow at the top of the world still holds its cold. Somewhere in the gray-green fog of Morthal, a small ghost has finally been allowed to rest. You can rest too.